his father's voice. It was only then that Rob realized how long he had held on to the hope that his uncle was still alive. Standing here, however, looking out at the great wild beyond and the wall behind them, the sinking feeling began to grow in his heart that Benjen was dead. Never again would they sit around a hearth in Winterfell, badgering him to tell them stories of his rangings. The thought of him dying alone in the cold left Rob with a sadness too deep for words. He could not speak of it any longer, and there were other matters that weighed heavy on him still. Willis Marndaly told me of all I've missed. He told me about John. He said. John turned his cloak. There's some wilderling woman. He said John betrayed the watch. Saying it now made the tale sound even stranger. He could not believe it, he wouldn't. Father turned and looked out across the battlefield. That is one tale. There was a grim cast to his eyes. It can't be true. Some of the brothers believe it. Those who do are calling for his punishment. For the first time in years, Rob thought of the crisp summer day when he sat tall and still on his horse and watched as his father questioned the deserter from the Night's Watch. The man had been old and scrawny, his ears and fingers bitten off by frostbite, and too frightened to speak. His father called for ice and in one single sure stroke, took off the man's head. Rob was horrified. No. Rob. Father, you must not let them. He frowned. I know you love your cousin well, but the Night's Watch is pledged to take no part in the quarrels of the realm, and in turn House Stark does not meddle in their squabbles. Squabbles? Rob asked, incredulous. The wall stands because the men have held true to their vows and remained at their posts. If we take part in their matters needlessly, do not think they will not remember. And when the day comes when the Watch is strong once more, they may choose to march south and not north. His father added, more softly now, your anger will make things worse for John. The king, his father, is here with his knights. We his kin are here, and with us the lords of the north. No one will harm him. His father's tone brooked no argument and Rob at last fell silent. We ride on a dangerous road now, father continued. Mance Rayder is captured, but not killed, and the question remains of what to do with him and his people. The king thinks on it still, but he has begun to ask after the gift. He means to settle them there. They must be dealt with, he says, though he doesn't seem in a hurry to do any dealing. He is locked in the Maester's tower poring over tomes, as he has been since the battle was won. Father said evenly. We can reach him yet, I believe. He must know he cannot do what he did on Pike. He cannot cut off the head of this snake. The wildlings will keep coming south, whether the king beyond the wall leads them or not. House Stark had been forced to give up the new gift, 25 leagues granted to the Night's Watch when the Targaryens forced Lord Alaric's hand. It was one matter that the lands had been given to the Watch in perpetuity. It was another to think that the wildlings might be let through, that the king might allow the north to be flooded with savages. What shall you advise him? For a moment, he was silent. What say you? What we do here will not only for this winter, or for a few seasons after, or even until I am in the crypts beside my father, and you beside me. We cannot know what your children's fates will be, or their children after them. But we can prepare their way. Rob did not fear his judgment, but he was suddenly a boy once more, hoping he might please him. But he was a man now, and he would not rush to a hasty judgment or appear to be indecisive. I need to learn more of the battles. I must speak to the men who led the vans and to the brothers of the Watch who were in command. And John. If he traveled with the wildlings he might know of their plans and movements, Rob admitted. But winter is coming and the keeps the Ironborn attacked must be rebuilt. The lands of the Gift are thin and stony and the wildlings know nothing of harvest. They will starve and keeping coming south. That would mean war with the mountain clans and the Umbers. And war with Winterfell. It would mean death for us all in the winter. His father studied him, and the wildlings. What would you do with them? He looked over his shoulder at where the wildlings were encircled and back again at the forest. How many were still out there, moving slowly south? The wind shifted around them. The haunted forest came to life. The cold air set the leaves to rustling and the trees seemed to press closer around them as though to swallow them whole, or trap them between forest and wall. It felt suddenly colder too, and he pulled his hood up around his face. The forest seemed to brood around them. One day, they would fight, here at the foot of this unfriendly world. The wildlings who emerged from here, behind thicket and brush, were smashed with no choice but to yield, or fly again into the wilderness. The dead, though, would not flee, for they had nothing to fear. "We are not yet at the point of despair," father said, softly. Rob made himself smile. He felt stronger somehow when he was alone. To know that the men around him looked only to him, that if he showed weakness the fear would be in them too, it had held him together. It was too easy around his father to play the boy again, to seek his comfort and embrace. Instead, they parted after a few more of the battle and the state of the castle. Hunger coiled in his belly, and he took the long walk back to Castle Black as the snow drifted down around him. There was one matter that remained before at last he could rest. Rob found his cousin outside the armory, watching some men practicing their drills. The clash of swords filled the air. At his side was one of the brothers of the watch, a large man with a moon-shaped face and dark hair, balancing in his hands a stack of scrolls. They were speaking fast, and quietly, but when John saw him, the man smiled awkwardly and retreated. He wanted to run to him, to embrace him as though they were boys once more, but they were no longer in Winterfell. John was a man of the watch now. He had taken his vows and sworn to put aside his old family. Their wolves were circling each other, sniffing at one another as Grey Wind yelped excitedly into the air. Ghost broke off from Grey Wind and padded silently over to Rob, rubbing against his legs. Kneeling, he hugged the wolf and scratched behind his ear. When he pulled back, John stood over them. He saw for the first time how his cousin has changed. John was bearded now and his face scarred, torn apart around his eye as though clawed. His cousin held himself up awkwardly, as though suffering some unseen injury. "You're late, Stark." Rob grinned. "You said you would keep the wall safe for me and I might as well take up needlework with the girls. I thought I might try at it." John's face spread into a matching smile. "Did you practice your stitches on Pike?" "I." "Something of the sort." He put his hand on John's shoulders. Surely the brothers could not begrudge them that. It was only then that he saw the black leather shoulder sheath slung across his back. It held a sword, the hilt adorned with a wolf's head pommel. Ever sharp-eyed, John caught his gaze. "Long Claw. Mormont's sword." John nodded. "The Lord Commander gave it to me. A bastard sword for a bastard." There was a bitter turn to his mouth, as though the words were not his. Rob made himself smile. "Come, eat with me." His rooms had been prepared for his arrival. A fire roared in its hearth and on a small table sat a dinner of boiled eggs, stewed plums, hot porridge and cider. John only ate a little, drank less, and listened more than he said. Rob let all that had passed since their parting spill out, the ride back to Winterfell when he first learned of Uncle Benjen's disappearance, his journeys through the north, the birth of his son. It was only when afternoon turned into dusk that his cousin at last spoke. "I broke my vows," John said, quietly. "With a woman of the free folk. I shared my furs with her. I wasn't strong enough. I rode with the wildings and ate with them, as Clorin Halfhand commanded me. But I never turned my cloak. He told me to ride with them, watch, I must not balk, He knew they would make me kill him to prove myself and told me to do whatever they asked of me. I escaped as soon as I could, and never took up arms against my brothers or the realm. The free folk, he called them. The wildlings were raiders and rapers, crueler and more savage than wild beasts. If Sir Willie's retelling was true, through some dark magic they had conjured monsters on their march to rival old Nan's stories, bear-like men with swords thrice as large as ice, with hands that hung down too far, beady rat's eyes and flat faces. They were as woolly as the mammoths they rode on. "You're no turncloak," Rob agreed. He could not believe that of his cousin. He tried to think. What would he himself do, if he were lost beyond the wall, without hope, without friends? He could not imagine laying with one of their women, never that, but perhaps he would do as John had done, join them, learn of their movements, and escape when he could, rode to the wall to warn his brothers. "What you did took courage. Another man might not have had the strength to fight the wildlings, outnumbered and alone. You could have stayed there in the wild and abandoned his brothers." "I should have stayed with her," John said, into the quiet of the room. There was shame in that admission, and a grief too deep for words. The wilderling was dead. The realization came to Rob slowly, and then all at once. "I'm sorry, John." The words did not come easily to him. He had wed a princess, the most beautiful woman in the world, some said. But a wilderling. Sir Willis had told him of the things they fought that looked like men but with bare feet, black and scaly. And those with painted faces, blue, green, and purple, and teeth files as sharp as nails. But, surely there were others who looked like the men and women of the mountain clans. And perhaps it did not matter. He had found his own wife monstrous too in a way, though it shamed him to think of it now. Hers was the blood of the dragon lords of old Valyria, and it was the blood of the Mad King. That had not mattered once they were in her bed, Rob reminded himself. There, they were as man and woman. Had he not found pleasure there, so heady there was little else he could think of in those first few months of marriage save how many hours of daylight remained until he could return to their chambers. Had he not mourned her bitterly, and upon seeing her felt a relief that left him trembling? John was a man of the night's watch. He would never stand before a heart tree beside a woman, high-born or low, nor hold a babe in his arms and name him. Perhaps this wilderling was the only woman he would ever know, the only love he might feel. Rob continued, his mouth dry. "I'm glad you're alive. When we said our farewells, I told myself that when I next came, I would bring Bran and Rickon with me. And then the war began and I did not think I would see any of you again." These words he had long kept close to his heart, words he had been scared to utter, felt easy to say now, like letting out a long-held breath. "Me too." John smiled wanly. "They all say you're a hero. You defeated the Ironborn at Moat Cailin and smashed their defense at Pike. Do you know what they call you?" Rob reddened. Yes. The young wolf. He had only fought in 2 battles, and each time had been a close thing, victory and death dancing on a knife's edge. "But you saved the Night's Watch. What will they call you?" His cousin silently flexed his sword hand. With a sigh, he leaned across the table and poured them each a cup from a flagon of cider. John downed a swig. "Turncloak. Oathbreaker. Murderer." "No," Rob said quickly. He laid a hand on his arm. "Never that." Silence descended upon them. 100 years ago they had shared their first cup of wine together when they were no more than boys. They drank too quickly, and laughed and coughed as it went up their noses. It seemed they had spent half their lives playing and fighting together. They had shared their fears and hopes too, and even tears in Winterfell's quiet and secret places where none could see them. It was only when they had finished the flagon and Rob reached for a second that John spoke again. "We should toast to your son." John smiled and reached under the table to ruffle Ghost's fur. The strong drink had made Rob light-headed. With his free hand, John raised his cup. "To Cregan Stark. To his health. May he grow to be strong and brave, and rule Winterfell with wisdom and justice." Rob smiled, "To Cregan." The rest of the cider seemed somehow sweeter after that. It was only when they were well and truly drunk that they dared to speak of dragons. "I saw them. They did not have to be quiet here." The rooms were vast and the wind whipped outside the windows so wildly that it filled the room with the sound of lashes and banners rippling. Rob found himself almost whispering all the same. "The dragons almost doomed us. When old Nan used to tell tales of them, I always dreamed of them as overgrown horses." To his own surprise, he found himself laughing. He had drunk too much. "I thought the Targaryens of old guided them with their reins, whipped them into submission and commanded them with their words. And then when you found the direwolves, I thought they might be something of that sort. Grey Wind has a mind of his own, a spirit. I've seen him tear apart men on the battlefield, but he is at my side on a word, as gentle as a kitten when needed. The dragons are not like that. They are larger than any beast I have ever seen, and when they spit their fire, the heat is enough to singe a man's hair 5 leagues away." Rob took a long drink. "They cannot control them. Daenerys, I mean. She cannot, or only just. Euron Greyjoy almost took one. If he had. I saw her afterwards. I think she's frightened." John set his mouth in a grim line. "You mustn't say that to anyone." 1,000 men had seen it. Although that was not what the tale-tellers now said. They told of the beautiful princess who rode Balerion reborn, and of the handsome prince of Dragonstone who had leapt through the air and defeated Euron Greyjoy, casting down his black magic. All had seen the dragons fall, but while he was in sickbed, in his poppy sleep, they had seen the dragons fly out once more. Cleared men had cheered. It was he alone that saw Daenerys, he alone that had held her face in his hands. You did not see them. Seeing is another thing. You mustn't say that, Jon repeated. He sounded so much like the king that Robb was taken aback. There are things I have seen too. The dead are walking. I burned my hand defending Lord Mormont from a White, and on the first we were attacked by a tide of living dead men with black hands and bright blue eyes. Nothing could stop them, not the swords of the Watch nor Mance Rayder's armies. And the dragons will. The dragons might. Or they might kill us all, Robb replied. But he did not want to speak of that now. He sighed, I wish we were back in Winterfell. His cousin smiled sadly. Some nights I dream of that too. Jon did not linger. He left to join his brothers and their choosing, and Robb was alone once more. The rooms in the King's Tower were not as large as the ones he had slept in when he had first come to Castle Black. There was a true king here now, and those chambers were for him and his men. But when Jon had gone, they felt as vast as Winterfell itself and so horribly lonely. Robb's head was spinning. Drunk on cider, tired to the bone, he found himself thinking of Jon. Something had left his cousin, left some empty space. Was it for his wilderling girl and his grief? Robb wondered how long he had loved her, how could he have opened his heart to her and shared her bed? But he had. Perhaps it was Robb who was too hard-hearted, even before war and horror. An hour of restless tossing convinced him that it was hopeless. He rose and from the small writing desk drew out a fresh sheet of paper, and dipped the quill in the inkpot. To the royal princess, Daenerys Targaryen. Robb paused. He did not know where to send it. What sort of husband was he, who did not even know where his wife was? By the time this letter finds you, you will have learned of what happened on the wall. I am well and my wounds only pain me a little. I thank you for your care. The words were stiff and clumsy. And he was so drunk. When last we were here, you came to me on the wall, wrapped up in white furs and shivering, and told me you were with child. It was like drinking summer wine. I looked at you and it was warm as summer. Shall I order you back to Winterfell? Do you wish for that? Then I command it. Return to Winterfell. When we go back. When? His father had said not to despair. We can make another son and guard our children, love them and keep them living and warm. He signed the letter, your lord husband, and sealed it with wax before he had the chance to think any better of it. It was a while yet before he could sleep, and as he began to drift off, a rapping came upon the door. Rumpled and sleepy, he opened the door to find a black brother awaiting him with an invitation to join a meeting with the Lord Commander in his chambers. Mormont is dead, Robb said, dumbly. Not Mormont, the brother said. It was Jon. The command was his. Chapter 21, Barristan I. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The Prince of Dragonstone was not sparing with his smiles. He and the Princess Rhaenys had been children of easy laughter and uncontrollable giggles. Aegon Targaryen was not quite as bold as his sister, but well-mannered and sweet, quick to make friends all the same. There was more of King Rhaegar to him then, a tendency towards seeking out quiet places where he could be alone, though he never shared his father's melancholy. He changed though when he became a man, as most princes do. There was something to him now that reminded Barristan not of Rhaegar but of the Queen's brothers. Aegon smiled as before, charmed as before, but had become patient and cunning as was Prince Doran's way. At times, Barristan saw too there was a danger to him now, a look that recalled the Red Viper. Somehow, he could get a man wrapped up in his words, snag him on a snare and leave him none the wiser of all he had admitted at the end of it. Like many princes before him, he had tried to strip the innocence from himself. King Rhaegar was guarded, save in the company of a select few companions, but years ago it seemed to Sir Barristan Prince Aegon had ceased to share his thoughts with anyone. It would make him a good king, Barristan decided, if his cautious did not wither to distrust. The keeping of his vows had grown hard in the last years of King Aerys Rhaeg. He had seen things that it pained him to recall, and more than once he wondered how much of the blood was on his own hands. Duskendale had been his finest hour, yet the memory tasted bitter on his tongue. King Rhaegar. He was good and just, but he had dishonored himself with the Stark girl, disgraced his crown further when he did not send her back to Winterfell or across the narrow sea but given her a household and a keep in the Kingswood. If the king took comfort in his one-time mistress still, he hid it well, for Barristan saw no signs of a continued attachment. It had been a blot on his reign, but many men and kings alike had failed when they chose love over duty. There was little that seemed to move the Prince of Dragonstone. It was not for coldness, nor for a lack of heart, but a strength of will he wielded over himself. There were few who would describe him as dutiful or sombre, but that was what Barristan saw in the prince above all, in the quiet of the day when he guarded him alone. The boy wanted to be a good king, would spend hours poring over tomes in the privacy of his rooms, had travelled to Dorne, the Riverlands, the Stormlands and the Reach, and held audience with high lords and small folk alike. Although at times stubborn, he had learned to take counsel better of late and always tended towards kindness. Anger did not darken his mind often, nor did he brood on slights, but rather disarm them with quick wit and a smile. Most of all, Barristan did not see the taint of madness in him. But now the world was full of dragons, and Barristan had begun to worry for his prince. Their journey from Banefort was laborious, and slow. Laden down with 100 knights and their horses, and Aegon healing still from the injuries, they lingered at the coast of the Sunset Sea too long. The dragons were in need of rest too, though it was the hills and mountains of the Westerlands they preferred. There, they disappeared, to hunt or sleep, sending the miners to escape south towards the crag. From there, their march was a lonely one. Villages and towns emptied ahead of their arrival, and the lords who opened their castles to them tried hard to hide their fear. The dragons did not always follow, and there were days when Princess Daenerys disappeared alone to search for them. They were drawn east, she explained, they wanted to return to Dragonstone. Somehow, she bent them to her will, whether through entreaty or force, and she returned each time weary. They sent riders ahead of their arrival to Riverrun, and the gates had been left open to them, but none came to meet them. Though his brothers were further afield, the Black Dragon flew with them today. Like every boy in the Seven Kingdoms, Barristan had grown up on stories of Balerion, the Black Dread, with wings which were so vast that whole towns were swallowed up in their shadow when he passed overhead. A child could easily believe that tale, perhaps even be thrilled by it, but it was a wonder hard to imagine as a man. Until he saw it with his own eyes, not Balerion but the dragon Daenerys had named Shadow Tamer, spread his wings out like a black cloud and banish away any hope of the sun. Riverrun sat at the juncture of two rivers, surrounded by deep waters on two sides, making it impervious to assault. It had seldom been taken, and never by storm. Beneath its western wall where the main gate stood, a moat was dug, fed by complicated sluice gates that allowed them to be flooded at need. With its moat fully flooded, Riverrun would become an island, all but invulnerable to assault. Save for dragons, Sir Barristan thought. Aegon the Conqueror had won his war simply with the beasts alone, but what he had accomplished could not have been done without them. It was only when they were within Riverrun's yard that at last Princess Rhaenys emerged, 30 Tully knights at her back. Their swords were sheathed, but they watched the skies anxiously. It was a look of wonder and horror that had become familiar to Barristan. The princess, though guarded, could not help the flitting of her eyelids upwards, her arms wrapped around her belly where her second child grew. The dragon's shadow had grown smaller as he flew higher and further, until at last the sun shone on Riverrun again. Only then did it feel like the fear had left them. It was then that she rushed forward, and embraced Aegon and Daenerys both. What words passed between them, Sir Barristan did not know, but when at last they pulled apart, tears glimmered in their eyes. It was a moment longer before Arya Stark burst forward from the keep, her massive wolf at her heels. Sir Barristan remembered the girl but little from when he was last in Riverrun, though he had heard the tale of her wildness on the Trident as they journeyed north. She certainly looked wild now, face flushed and hair a rat's nest, her dress falling awkwardly on her slender body. "Is it true? Are there dragons?" she asked. Too late she remembered her manners, and bowed to the prince. And just as quickly she forgot them, clinging to Princess Daenerys' sleeve and peppering her with questions. "What happened? I thought you got burned. Is it true about the dragons?" Sir Barristan could not help but smile under his helm. Princess Rhaenys came forward. "Sir, you are a welcome sight. Come, rest and eat and we can speak." There was plenty of both rest and food to be had in Riverrun in the days thereafter. Edmure Tully was in Pike yet, one of the lords the king had tasked with negotiating the peace terms, and the castle was under Rhaenys' rule. They were long, warm days that felt like summer, where a man might forget for a moment or an hour the dragons that hunted in the mountains and craggy land above the Tumblestone and of the battle raging now on the wall. Rhaenys' daughter, Betha, was walking and talking now, a precious little girl with the Tully blue eyes. And just as her mother, all seemed to love her, even Arya Stark, who wore a scowl more often than not, and incessantly, alternately asked when she would be returning to Winterfell and she could see the dragons. There were other times when it could not be ignored that they were on the cusp of some even greater dream or nightmare. He felt it all the more acutely when Daenerys would disappear with her dragons, sometimes for a handful of hours, others for days at a time. There were places she would go that Barristan could not follow, and so he endeavored to teach her how to better survive, to light a fire, where best to find shelter, how to read the skies and stars, what sounds and tracks to listen and watch for in the wild. She was a grateful and eager student, and did not show her fear, but her hands were not used to rough work. It was safest for her if she remained in the sky, and when her dragon came down, to bring him to places not easily reached by man. It was no simple thing to slay a dragon in the sky. Many had tried to bring down Aegon and his sisters with force. Euron Greyjoy used magic, and none succeeded. Barristan had not thought Daenerys shared the Princess Rhaenys' wildness. The times she had come to court, she had been a quiet child, small and slight, eager to please and to obey. It was Rhaenys who tested the limits of what her mother and her septars would allow. But the dragons were bound to Daenerys, as she was to them. Both dragon and girl were pulled as by two strings, one which drew them apart and the other together, tying together their fate. Prince Aegon, too, sought to entangle himself with them. He must, for it was on that which his future crown would rest on. Who would follow a Targaryen king without dragons now that they flew the skies of Westeros once more? Would men look to Daenerys and her Stark children instead? There was a sweet innocence to the princess still, much like what he had seen in her when she was a girl yet unwed, traveling to Riverrun to meet her betrothed. She had sought to do what was right on Pike, and nearly risked it all. But every day her dragons remained without riders was a risk. Sir Barristan knew no more of dragons than the tales every child hears, but he knew Targaryens. Most men would flee at the sight of the creatures, at the crack of leathern wings and the heat of their breath, as all the small folk did, as hundreds had in battle. Not the Targaryens. Viserys had raced towards them to his doom, but Aegon was not that sort of man. He had been too weak to fly when they departed from the Iron Islands. The dragons too were wounded, and their own flight had been a desperate hurtle across the sky. The prince, however, had made no move to claim one since, and more often than not spent his days in secret meeting with his sister. It was due to Princess Rhaenys that he was invited into the room of their nightly debates, and not instructed to remain guard outside its door. "You are the Lord Commander of the King's Guard," she had said. "You have counseled 3 Targaryen kings, and we are surely in need of counsel now, if you will give it." Barristan prayed for the wisdom to guide them. He joined them as the Prince of Dragonstone was finishing his dinner, and soon after they heaped upon him troubles upon troubles. The first was the Tyrells. A raven had arrived from Mace Tyrell a week prior, inviting the prince to Highgarden for what remained of the year before travelling together with his betrothed to King's Landing for their wedding. There had been no reply yet from the prince, who showed no intention of obeying his good father-to-be. The other troubles, as ever, were dragons. The prince and princess had brought him here for his counsel, but before him they began to walk again the steps of the arguments that had plagued them these long evenings prior. The dragon must have 3 heads, said Aegon. Before his sat a half-finished meal of chestnut soup, crusty bread, and fruits. "We will be stronger together. If it is to be I, you, and Daenerys, let us go to them together." "I won't risk my child," Rhaenys said. "My husband needs an heir." "You have a daughter," her brother said, easily. "And it will not be a risk." The Targaryen princesses and queens of old rode on dragonback when they were with child. Those dragons they raised from hatchlings, or inherited from their own kin. "These dragons, they are not flesh and blood, they are as spectres," she continued. House Tully had never been ruled by a woman, and Betha is a child, and half Dornish. Do you not think that there are many who would prefer to see Bran or Rickon Stark sit in the seat of the Tullys? And turmoil would come to your kingdom then, with a Stark in Winterfell and another in Riverrun. Aegon sighed, and Barristan reminded himself he had not been permitted to speak yet. You would be a dragon rider, one of the first in centuries. Or die, and leave my child to burn to death within me, Rhaenys countered. I need time. Let me do my duty, let me birth my child, and once he is 2 or 3 and hale and healthy I will do what you say. For a moment the prince did not reply. Instead, he stared out across the table, regarding the food and drink but not touching anything. We have no time, he said softly at last. The fighting is over at the wall. But father writes that it was nothing, like a horn blowing before a true battle. So you would have us hurtle out into the abyss? Asked the princess. She took a seat beside him and placed a hand on his arm. You know what happened on Dragonstone. If it was magic, then it was the darkest sort. What starts in sin will not end save in grief and defeat. In your heart, you must know. Dragonstone. Summerhall. The words tasted as bitter as poison. How the dragons had come into the world, he did not know. The king had not seen fit to share, and his sworn brothers too kept their secrets at his command. He knew only that the dragons had been reborn among sorcery and death. What King Aegon the Unlikely had failed to do, Princess Daenerys had succeeded. Both their attempts had ended in destruction and death. Barristan had heard it said that the wildfire burned still on Dragonstone, the horizon a great green cloud. As a child, there was nothing that seemed to cow Rhaenys. It was her that would drag Aegon towards perceived dangers, to play among the massive dragon skulls in the Great Hall, or to pet stray cats and kittens that wandered in from the streets of King's Landing. She was not cowed now. It was not fear, but reason, that guided her words. Princess Rhaenys had the right of it. With dragons came death, and sacrifice. She could not add her child and the rule of Riverrun to that number. How many kings had he served? How many princesses and princes had he guarded silently, or counseled as they poured out their woes? He had come to see how a dream of the present could grip them, until the past and future were silent as death. It had gripped Rhaegar when he was a prince, and he crowned Lyanna Stark for all eyes to see. And perhaps it gripped Aegon now. If he came to see it, he would not admit it. Gently, he disentangled himself from his sister and for the first time, addressed Sir Barristan. Sir, what do you make of Lord Tyrell and his invitation? Aegon asked. He took the letter in his hands and ran his fingers over it, as though to decipher some hidden meaning. Frowning, he put it down. He likes to play the fool, I know, but my mother says he is more cunning than he looks. Sir Barristan nodded. Her Grace the Queen is wise. Lord Tyrell will know of the dragons, his sons will have seen you defeat Euron Greyjoy on pike and ride atop one, or at least heard the tales. The Tyrells will be pleased now to know it not only a Targaryen prince they are to wed, but a renewed dynasty of dragon riders. He will want the marriage to take place with all haste and he will not easily bear any delay. The Tyrells had been sure allies of House Targaryen and held true to their vows to Aerys when all others proved faithless, but it had cost them little. They besieged Storm's End and left the Baratheons nearly on the point of starvation, and when the time came that Robert Baratheon would not bend the knee and was hanged as a traitor, they had taken and raised Renly Baratheon as hostage. They filled King Rhaegar's court. Soon, Loras Tyrell would take his place as a brother of the Kingsguard and Margaery would be crowned princess. They were honors that no lord would easily accept to be parted from, much less one who felt they were owed. He will call his banners if you don't wed Margaery, said Princess Rhaenys. The prince shook his head. No. He would stand alone. He means to leave himself unwed. Barristan realized. It is Daenerys then he wants. If it was lust that Aegon had come to feel for his aunt, he hid it well. Lust would be safer. But Aegon was a careful prince, the knight reminded himself, ever aware of the fractured kingdom he would inherit and the men who praised him in one voice and in another disparaged his Dornish blood. Even if he claimed a dragon for his own, Daenerys would maintain her bond with the one she called Shadow Tamer as had the dragon riders of old. And when she died, who would claim the dragon in turn? Her Stark son, that is what Aegon feared, and his Stark father and Stark grandfather beginning to once more pick at old wounds. Lord Eddard was a reasonable man, but his son had been sullen at Riverrun and altogether too proud. They, most of all, had reason to fear the Targaryens and the coin flip that might see another mad tyrant ascend to the throne. What would that fear fester into it, if they hold a dragon and in another year, or 2, or 50 they come into conflict once more with the Iron Throne? It was this question that Aegon brooded over. Perhaps not alone, Barristan said. Stark and Tully will not join, and Jon Arryn is still bound to Ned Stark in friendship. I do not believe Stannis Baratheon will not take arms against his liege. But there is Tywin Lannister, and for years he has nursed his anger at not resuming his seat as Hand, added Sir Barristan. He had been called to give his counsel and he would give it, no matter how hard it was to hear. If I may speak bluntly, Your Grace. The Prince of Dragonflies loved Jenny of Oldstone so much he cast aside a crown, and Westeros paid the bride price in corpses. All 3 of the sons of the 5th Aegon had wed for love, in defiance of their father's wishes. King Aegon allowed his sons to have their way, making bitter enemies where he might have had fast friends. If you do not wed Margaery, I fear your grace would make Lord Tyrell a foe, and treason and turmoil will follow as night follows day. Rhaenys nodded, and you are not king yet. You must still obey. You were promised to Margaery Tyrell, and now you are commanded to wed her. Claim your dragon now, as I know you will and feel you must, and then go to Highgarden so men will not call you Oathbreaker. Aegon the Unlikely did not have dragons, the prince replied simply. Rhaenys persisted, as ever. Aegon. Promise me. The prince regarded his sister silently with his purple eyes. At last he smiled, and with that gesture, the nervous tension that came perilous close to anger seemed to soften too. Sir Barristan could not help but marvel at how much hung on the whims of a prince. What would you have me say, sister? Say you will go to Margaery Tyrell and wed her, and mean it. I will say it if you stop talking. The prince wished to end the conversation, that was clear, but could he have so quickly come to reason? Aegon, said Rhaenys, firmly. I will do what you say. Do I have your leave now to go to bed? The princess did not believe it. She lingered, measuring her words perhaps, or trying to read some imperceptible on her brother's face. Sir Barristan, if you could prepare for my brother's departure, she said, and though she spoke to him it was Aegon still she looked to. The prince leaned across the table, plucked a grape from his plate and popped it into his mouth. A fortnight perhaps is all he needs. To tame a dragon. The prince raised an eyebrow. Yes, a fortnight should be sufficient. A fortnight, Aegon. No more delays, Rhaenys said, firmly. A fortnight, he agreed. Time passed as much as before, and though it was peaceful, inexplicably Barristan felt they were sitting on an edge, and the hammer would soon strike. The blow came the day before their departure. The prince found him in the yard, practicing drills. There was somewhere he must go before they left the Riverlands, Aegon said, and he would need a guard for the journey. Sir Barristan obeyed. It was a place High Heart that the prince sought out. They labored for half a day to find it, with nothing to guide them save a sliver of something Aegon had found in a book, and it was only late afternoon that the hill rose up before them. They climbed up to make certain of it, and there found a circle of huge stumps that were all that remained of weirwoods. Here atop, it was as though they could see all the Riverlands, a flat and green carpet that spread out endlessly before them, canopied beneath a grey and gloomy sky. It was an easy place to defend, Barristan noted, and one where it would be difficult to be caught unawares. In all his travels, it was not a place Barristan had ever heard of nor visited. The Prince of Dragonstone though seemed to know its tale. The hill had been especially holy to the first men, as it had been to the children of the forest before them. Crowned by a grove of giant weirwoods, ancient as any that had been seen in the Seven Kingdoms, High Heart had been the abode of the children and their green seers. When the Andal King Erej the Kinslayer surrounded the hill, the children emerged to defend it, calling down clouds of ravens and armies of wolves, or so the legend says. Yet neither tooth nor talon was a match for the steel axes of the Andals, who slaughtered the green seers, the beasts, and the first men alike, and raised beside the High Heart a hill of corpses half again as high. King Rhaegar was fond of history and searching out old ruins, puzzling out the lives of those who had lives there and the names they had called it. There were no ruins here, however, as far as Barristan could see, nor ghosts. Egon stood atop of one of the great stumps and looked out across the hill, and left the work of lighting the fire to Barristan. He gathered some sticks, whittled down some thin strips of bark for kindling, and once the fire was burning, took his watch looking out across the horizon. There they waited. Egon spoke only once. The night was thick around them and the wind howling. "My brother is now Lord Commander of the Night's Watch," the prince said so softly that Barristan strained to hear. "I had a letter from my father last night." Sir Barristan was taken aback. He'd had a letter of his own with the news. "Yes, your grace. Targaryen princes and their bastard brothers had been a tale the knight had walked before. Jon had seemed a good sort of lad, quiet and capable, but Barristan had slept easier since he joined the watch. "When I was a child, my father told me stories of the Kingsguard," the prince continued on. "He taught me the first duty of the Kingsguard is to defend the king from harm or threat. The White Knights must obey the king's commands, to keep his secrets, counsel him when counsel is requested, and keep silent when it was not. You vow to service his pleasure and defend his name and honor. But what of a prince's?" Sir Barristan regarded him across the embers of the fire. "It is at the king's pleasure that we are dispatched to serve his wife and children. As his grace your father taught you, we are sworn to keep his secrets, but there are no secrets which we may keep from him. Even those of a prince. But you would keep them from others." "From my sister?" he asked, in his same flat tone. Sir Barristan felt uneasy. "Yes, your grace." They fell once again to silence. It was an hour more of cold darkness before Barristan saw a small figure climbing the west side of the hill. An animal, he saw first, but no. Quickly and silently, he sheathed his sword and signaled to Egon to do the same, but the Prince of Dragonstone only stepped forward to meet it. "It's a woman," Barristan realized suddenly, "or something of the sort. Smaller than a child, she was stooped and wrinkled and leaning on an old black cane. Her white hair was so long it came almost to the ground, blowing about her head in a fine cloud. Her flesh was whiter, the color of milk, and her eyes red." He knew her. Somehow, his paths had crossed before with this stunted thing. And then he remembered. It was the Woods Witch, the one who 1,000 years ago had come to court with Jenny of Oldstones. She had told King Jaehaerys that the prince that was promised would come from his line, and it had led to grief and heartache. But she had been right. Daenerys was the prince that was promised, was she not, born of King Aerys and Queen Rhaella? "Sir, sheath your sword." "You'll frighten her," Egon said, firmly. That was a difficult command to obey, but Sir Barristan did as he was asked. Egon showed his open palms to the witch. "The Prince of Dragonstone and Sir Barristan Selmy have come to honor me," she said, squinting at them. Put your sword away or you'll anger the old gods. This place belongs to them still, they linger here as I do, shrunken and feeble but not yet dead. Nor do they love the flames. For the oak recalls the acorn dreams the oak, the stump lives in them both. And they remember when the first men came with fire in their fists. How have a prince and a knight come to this place, I wonder? Give me wine or I will go. My bones are old. My joints ache when the winds do blow, and up here the winds are always blowing. I have no wine to give you, but I have coin, if you would have it," Egon replied. "I cannot eat a bag of coins. Tell me what you wish first, and I will name my price." For the first time, the prince looked uncertain. He looked at Sir Barristan and gingerly took another step forward. "The dragons are born again. Have you seen them?" "I have seen them and dreamt of them." "It is them I wish to speak of," said the prince. "I rode one of the dragons, did you see that? On Pike, when I threw Euron Greyjoy off and I stayed atop it." The witch granted them a grotesque smile. "A kiss then, I'll have a kiss. It has been too long, too long. A prince's mouth tastes of honey, and mine of bones. I am too old." Aegon Targaryen did not refuse. He stepped forward and with a tenderness, took the witch's wrinkled hand in his. "You will have your kiss, my lady. But I am betrothed, so we must remain chaste." She cackled hard at that, and when the prince pressed his lips to her, it was a brief and soft thing. Afterwards, she brought her fingers to her mouth in a way that made Barristan sad beyond words. This was a place of grief, and ghosts. They had lingered too long. "I dreamt of you, you and the man with the terrible, wicked eye. and I saw you on Dragonstone. Kingslayer, Kinslayer. The words were like an icy draught through Sabaristan's heart, but the prince did not flinch. The gods saw you too. No man is accursed as a kinslayer. She smiled her wicked smile. I am not here to speak of the past, but of what is to come. She regarded him with dim red eyes. I dreamt of you atop the dragon, and your heart was his and his heart was yours. You stood before a black tree and around you an army of ice swept across everything green and beautiful. I dreamt of you, changing, and I saw you wringing out your crown and your throne like the neck of a cat. You are a demanding prince. I saw you, I dreamt of you leaving creatures around you ashamed and bleeding. You don't taste of honey. You taste like you did in my dreams, you have cinnamon and cloves on your tongue. Suddenly, Egon smiled. Whatever he learned had pleased him, and that worried Sabaristan more than anything else he had learned. They shared what little bread they brought with them with the woman, and soon after she vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. Sabaristan would have had them leave this place now, but it was too perilous to descend the hill in the dark. And so they sat by the fire in a heady silence, unsleeping until dawn crept back over the hill. Your Grace, we should return to Riverrun. We leave for Highgarden at noon. The prince rose from where he sat cross-legged by the dying fire, and wiped the dirt off his hands. No, he said abruptly. I will not be returning to Riverrun. Do you mean to make for Highgarden directly? Sabaristan asked, cautiously. He knew the answer, however. The prince would break his promise to his sister, and to Lord Tyrell in turn. No, Egon said again. I do not mean to go at all. Take me to Daenerys. Sabaristan reminded himself what he was sent here to do. King Rhaegar had instructed him to protect Prince Egon and Princess Daenerys, to make easy and swift their path wherever he could and share his counsel and wisdom. But beyond that, the king had given him no command. He could not alter the Prince of Dragonstone's path, but if all he could do was guard him with sword and shield, he would do not fail. Finding dragons was no easy task. Their favorite haunt of late was the hills north of the Tumblestone. It would be months yet before they were completely healed of their injuries and able to safely fly long distances, and the lands were easy hunting grounds, full of wild rams and other prey they could grow fat on. The gods, however, smiled on Prince Egon. Rhaenys had posted guards from the water gate to the where the Tumblestone dried up, and the lands of the Lannisters began. They had seen Daenerys walk up not half a day prior, and if they hurried, they might reach her before she met her dragons. Thank you for your counsel, sir, and your protection, the prince said, smiling. But there are places where even a prince must go alone. Sabaristan's words failed him. He had sworn his oaths to Rhaegar, vowed to protect the prince from danger, but he did not know now what the king would have him do. Egon might ascend the hills and return a dragon rider, or the Seven Kingdoms would lose its heir, the king and queen their son, and then. But he could not stop him. The prince was a man, not a child, and a Targaryen. I shall wait for your grace on the north bank of the Tumblestone, he said. The prince nodded, gave a pull on his reins and rode up towards the river. Barristan waited. He ate, and slept, and lived in the makeshift camp with the Tully Knights and watched the sky. For hours each day, Princess Rhaenys joined him in his vigil, speaking little and worry etched on her face. The dragons emerged again after 7 nights, at dawn on clear and crisp. The black dragon came first, circling lazily between the clouds on the far south of the mountain range. Sabaristan's breath caught in his throat. Where were the others? It a moment or two, a lifetime, before the bronze one took flight, shining in the sun like coin, and the silver after him as bright as moonlight. All around him, the guards were on their feet. All around him was talk and chatter and wonder. Does the dragon have a ride? Sabaristan shouted over the rabble. Do you see your prince? There was no answer, only chaos, only confusion as all tried to strain for a look across the leagues and the canopy of trees that hung around them. If he is dead. If his courage failed him. The Lord Commander of the King's Guard did not waste time looking for his horse then. He ran through the trees with all the swiftness he could muster, crossing over streams and brooks and in between dreams, until he reached a clearing in the trees and patch of higher ground where he could better see. And yes, there among the white clouds, the dragons flew. A rider on the black, Daenerys in her saddle. The silver alone, But there, on the bronze, a figure, small and distant, but unmistakable, silver hair falling like a cape around him. It was the prince, Roriger's son atop a dragon. Sir Barristan heard himself cheering, and 100 voices joined him from the hills below. Notes. I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you again for your comments on the last chapter and the very warm and kind welcome you've given me as I returned to this story. It was a little awkward writing a chapter from Barristan's POV, and his observations of a character as enigmatic as Egon, who doesn't share his motivations and who we see here torn and uncertain and hiding it, trying to figure out what to do, maybe even building up the courage and buying himself time. I thought it would be the best way to get at a range of scenes that, for example, a Dany POV wouldn't realistically get at. I am also really starting to feel the pressure to move the story forward, so I'm catching myself rushing a bit. Regardless, I really hope you enjoy this latest installment and can't wait to read what you all think. As I've said before, you all have motivated me so much to keep going and keep the story alive in my imagination and in writing. Chapter 22, Bran 3. Notes. This chapter draws a lot, at times direct passages, from Bran's ADWD arc. I didn't see any point in attempting to reinvent the wheel, even if I could, given how dynamic those descriptions are. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Seated on his throne of roots in the great cavern, half corpse and half tree, Lord Brynden seemed less a man than some ghastly statue made of twisted wood, old bone, and rotted wool. The only thing that looked alive in the pale ruin that was his face was his one red eye, burning like the last coal in a dead fire, surrounded by twisted roots and tatters of leathery white skin hanging off a yellowed skull. The throne was in a great cavern by the abyss, black as pitch, black as tar, blacker than the feathers of a crow. Light entered as a trespasser, unwanted and unwelcome, and soon was gone again. Cook fires, candles, and rushes burned for a little while, then guttered out again, their brief lives at an end. One day I will be like him. The thought filled Bran with dread. Was he doomed to lose the rest too, to spend all of his years with a weirwood growing in him and through him? Lord Brynden drew his life from the tree, Leaf told them. He did not eat, he did not drink. He slept, he dreamed, he watched. It is time, Lord Brynden said. Something in his voice sent icy fingers running up Bran's back. Time for what? For the next step. For you to go beyond skin changing and learn what it means to be a Greenseer. The trees will teach him, said Leaf. Though the men of the Seven Kingdoms might call them the children of the forest, Leaf and her people were far from childlike. Little wise men of the forest would have been closer. They were small compared to men, as a wolf is smaller than a direwolf. That does not mean it is a pup. They had nut-brown skin, dappled like a deer's with paler spots, and large ears that could hear things that no man could hear. Their eyes were big too, great golden cat's eyes that could see down passages where a boy's eyes saw only blackness. Their hands had only 3 fingers and a thumb, with sharp black claws instead of nails. She beckoned, and another of the singers padded forward, the white-haired one that Mira had named Snowy Locks. She had a weirwood bowl in her hands, carved with a dozen faces, like the ones the heart trees wore. Inside was a white paste, thick and heavy, with dark red veins running through it. You must eat of this, said Leaf. She handed Bran a wooden spoon. He looked at the bowl uncertainly. What is it? A paste of weirwood seeds. Something about the look of it made Bran feel ill. The red veins were only weirwood sap, he supposed, but in the torchlight they looked remarkably like blood. He dipped the spoon into the paste, then hesitated. Will this make me a Greenseer? Your blood makes you a Greenseer, said Lord Brynden. This will help awaken your gifts and wed you to the trees. Bran did want to be married to a tree, but who else would wed a broken boy like him? 1,000 eyes, 100 skins, wisdom deep as the roots of ancient trees. A Greenseer. He ate. It had a bitter taste, though not so bitter as acorn paste. The first spoonful was the hardest to get down. He almost retched it right back up. The second tasted better. The third was almost sweet. The rest he spooned up eagerly. Why had he thought that it was bitter? It tasted of honey, of new-fallen snow, of pepper and cinnamon, and the last kiss his mother ever gave him. The empty bowl slipped from his fingers and clattered on the cavern floor. I don't feel any different. What happens next? Leaf touched his hand. The trees will teach you. The trees remember. He raised a hand, and the other singers began to move about the cavern, extinguishing the torches one by one. The darkness thickened and crept toward them. Close your eyes, said the three-eyed crow. Slip your skin, as you do when you join with summer. But this time, go into the roots instead. Follow them up through the earth, to the trees upon the hill, and tell me what you see. Bran closed his eyes and slipped free of his skin. Into the roots, he thought. Into the weirwood. Become the tree. For an instant he could see the cavern in its black mantle, could hear the river rushing by below. Then all at once he was outside. It was dark here too, and for a moment Bran felt a sadness so keen he almost began to cry. He'd wanted to go somewhere green, somewhere full of light, away from the black and white of the cave. But he was almost a man grown and that would not do. He looked closer. It was the trees, they pressed close to one another and shut out the light of the sun. On the ground, a thin crust of snow carpeted over fallen leaves, blood-red on top, black rot beneath, and all around him the wind set the trees to rustling. 8 he counted in the grove around him, 9 in total, with wide smooth trunk that were bone-pale and faces staring inward. The dried sack that crusted in the eyes was red and hard as ruby. And when he was done counting, 2 men appeared as though from the mist, their wolves at their side. Robb. Bran thought. Jon. There were no such trees in Winterfell, nor anywhere in the north. They were beyond the wall, they were together. Perhaps they had come to search for him. Perhaps they were close. But no. That wasn't be right. They were too young. When Bran had last seen his brother, Robb's hair had been cut short, his beard shorn. He stood here before him long-haired and bearded, smiling. He looked as he did when he had set off to journey with Jon to the wall. He wouldn't let Bran go with them, no matter how much he'd begged. Robb. He cried, despite himself. The cousins looked up in unison. Do you hear something? Jon asked. His brother and his cousin disappeared, and the grove faded and was gone, and he was back in the cavern, the pale thick roots of his weirwood throne cradling him as a mother does a child. A torch flared to life before him. Tell us what you saw. From far away Leaf looked almost a girl, no older than Bran or one of his sisters, but close at hand she seemed far older. She claimed to have seen 200 years. Bran's throat was very dry. He swallowed. My brother. I saw him with my cousin Jon, there beyond the wall. Only. It wasn't now. I mean, it was from before. I don't think they're there now. The thought made him feel a sadness too deep and desperate for words. A man must know how to look before he can hope to see, said Lord Brynden. Those were shadows of days past that you saw, Bran. You were looking through the eyes of a heart tree. Time is different for a tree than for a man. Sun and soil and water, these are the things a weirwood understands, not days and years and centuries. For men, time is a river. We are trapped in its flow, hurtling from past to present, always in the same direction. The lives of trees are different. They root and grow and die in one place, and that river does not move them. The oak is the acorn is the oak. And the weirwood, 1,000 human years are a moment to a weirwood, and through such gates you and I may gaze into the past. They heard me, said Bran. They heard a whisper on the wind, a rustling amongst the leaves. You cannot speak to them, try as you might. I know. I have my own ghosts, Bran. A brother that I loved, a brother that I hated, a woman I desired. Through the trees, I see them still, but no word of mine has ever reached them. The past remains the past. We can learn from it, but we cannot change it. Will I see them again? And his mother, and his father? Where were they now, he wondered. He had tried hard not to think of it. Safe in Winterfell, he hoped, but somehow that didn't make him feel any better. He wished he could be there with them, he wished he could climb and look out across the castle once more and learn all its secrets. He wished he could hear more of old Nan's stories, instead of live in one. He wished his mother would kiss his cheek once last time, and his father would take him hunting in the Wolf's Wood. When Hojan had first told him they must go north, Bran did not think it would mean forever. Men live their lives trapped in an eternal present, between the mists of memory and the sea of shadow, that is all we know of the days to come. Certain moths live their whole lives in a day, yet to them that little span of time must seem as long as years and decades do to us. An oak may live 300 years, a redwood tree 3,000. A weirwood will live forever if left undisturbed. To them seasons pass in the flutter of a moth's wing, and past, present, and future are one. Nor will your sight be limited to God's woods. The singers carved eyes into their heart trees to awaken them, and those are the first eyes a new green seer learns to use, but in time you will see well beyond the trees themselves. When? Bran wanted to know. In a year, or 3, or 10. That I have not glimpsed. It will come in time, I promise you. But I am tired now, and the trees are calling me. We will resume on the morrow. Bran walked back to his chamber, as Leif went before him with a torch. He had hoped that Moira and Hojan would be there, so he could tell them what he had seen, but their snug alcove in the rock was cold and empty. He sat on his bed and stared into the fire. 1,000 eyes, 100 skins, wisdom deep as the roots of ancient trees. Watching the flames, Bran decided he would stay awake till Moira came back. Hojan would be unhappy, he knew, but Moira would be glad for him. He did not remember closing his eyes. But then somehow he was back in the weirwood grove. Robb was gone. Bran looked down now on Jon and Sam, the black brother who had met them at the night fort and promised to keep his secret. With them were men of the watch. Jon and Sam knelt down in the snow. Hear my words, and bear witness to my vow, they recited, their voices filling the twilit grove. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. It shall not end until my death. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. I shall live and die at my post. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the fire that burns against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, the shield that guards the realms of men. I pledge my life and honor to the night's watch, for this night and all the nights to come. You knelt as boys, a man with a face round and red as a pomegranate intoned solemnly. Rise now as men of the night's watch. His cousin held out a hand to pull Sam back to his feet as men gathered around to offer smiles and congratulations. He saw Ghost, stalking softly between two weirwoods. The wolf had something in his jaws. It's a hand. Jon frowned. To me, Ghost. Bring it here. Jon and his wolf and his brothers dissolved, like mist in a morning sun, and the world around Bran grew brighter, warmer. He saw the deep black pool in the godswood, the pale roots of the heart tree twisting like an old man's gnarled arms. Winterfell, Bran whispered. He was in the godswood looking down upon his father. Lord Eddard Stark sat upon a rock beside the deep black pool in the godswood, the pale roots of the heart tree twisting around him like an old man's gnarled arms. The great sword ice lay across Lord Eddard's lap, and he was cleaning the blade with an oilcloth. Father. Bran's voice was a whisper in the wind, a rustle in the leaves. Father, it's me. It's Bran. Brandon. Was this now? Bran couldn't tell, and he began to despair. Eddard Stark lifted his head and looked long at the weirwood, frowning, but he did not speak. He cannot see me, Bran realized, just like Jon and Robb. He wanted to reach out and touch him, but all that he could do was watch and listen. I am in the tree. I am inside the heart tree, looking out of its red eyes, but the weirwood cannot talk, so I can't. Then, the godswood grew quieter, darker as day became night, and he looked out at everyone he had ever loved. Somehow, that made him feel sadder than before. There was old Nan and Hodder, Gage, Mickon, Jory, Farlin and Septon Chale and Mayor Stillowin, Pulla the kennel girl, Kynes boy Callan, Tom Two and Fat Tom. There were all his father's lords, and Sir Arthur in his shining white cloak. There was father again, and his mother, holding on to Rickon's hands, and there were his sisters wearing pretty dresses and Jon, standing half in the shadows. He even saw himself, smiling and whispering excitedly with Arya, and that was the strangest part of all. Robb and his bride knelt before the heart tree, the princess in her maiden cloak, a still smile on her face that hid her fear. Robb prayed, his lips moving silently. Bran the boy couldn't hear it, but the tree could. Help me to be brave, he whispered. Tonight and all nights to come. Bran felt his eyes fill up with tears. But were they his own tears, or the weirwood's? If I cry, will the tree begin to weep? He saw no more of his father, nor his brothers or sisters, but a woman heavy with child emerged naked and dripping from the black pool, knelt before the tree, and begged the old gods for a son who would avenge her. Then there came a brown-haired girl slender as a spear who stood on the tips of her toes to kiss the lips of a young knight as tall as Hodder. A dark-eyed youth, pale and fierce, sliced 3 branches off the weirwood and shaped them into arrows. The tree itself was shrinking, growing smaller with each vision, whilst the lesser trees dwindled into saplings and vanished, only to be replaced by other trees that would dwindle and vanish in their turn. And now the lords Bran glimpsed were tall and hard, stern men in fur and chain mail. Some wore faces he remembered from the statues in the crypts, but they were gone before he could put a name to them. Then, as he watched, a bearded man forced a captive down onto his knees before the heart tree. A white-haired woman stepped toward them through a drift of dark red leaves, a bronze sickle in her hand. "No," said Bran, "no, don't," but they could not hear him, no more than Robb and Jon had. The woman grabbed the captive by the hair, hooked the sickle round his throat, and slashed. And through the mist of centuries the broken boy could only watch as the man's feet drummed against the earth, but as his life flowed out of him in a red tide, Brandon Stark could taste the blood. And Bran was back in his chamber, alone and afraid. When at last he slept, he slipped into the skin of his wolf. Outside, the moon was a crescent, thin and sharp as the blade of a knife. Summer dug up a severed arm, black and covered with hoarfrost, its fingers opening and closing as it pulled itself across the frozen snow. There was still enough meat on it to fill his empty belly, and after that was done he cracked the arm bones for the marrow. Only then did the arm remember it was dead. Bran ate with Summer and his pack, as a wolf. And then he was a raven, flying with the murder, circling the hill at sunset, watching for foes, feeling the icy touch of the air. When he awoke, Bran felt adrift and unsure. He pinched his arm with his fingers, really hard, to make sure he was not dreaming, but the only thing that did was make his arm hurt. In the beginning he had tried to count the days by making note of when he woke and slept, but down here sleeping and waking had a way of melting into one another. Dreams became lessons, lessons became dreams, things happened all at once or not at all. Had he done that or only dreamed it? Leif did not come to fetch him that day, and Mira and Hojan were nowhere to be found, and so alone, he explored the caves. He found chambers full of bones, shafts that plunged deep into the earth, a place where the skeletons of gigantic bats hung upside down from the ceiling. He even crossed the slender stone bridge that arched over the abyss and discovered more passages and chambers on the far side. One was full of singers, enthroned like Brindon in nests of weirwood roots that wove under and through and around their bodies. Most of them looked dead to him, but as he crossed in front of them their eyes would open and follow the light of his torch, and one of them opened and closed a wrinkled mouth as if he were trying to speak. The days marched past, one after the other, each shorter than the one before. The nights grew longer. No sunlight ever reached the caves beneath the hill. No moonlight ever touched those stony halls. Even the stars were strangers there. Those things belonged to the world above, where time ran in its iron circles, day to night to day to night to day. He felt it all the more so when he was in Lord Brindon's chambers. The sight of him still frightened Bran, the weirwood roots snaking in and out of his withered flesh, the mushrooms sprouting from his cheeks, the white wooden worm that grew from the socket where one eye had been. He liked it better when the torches were put out. In the dark he could pretend that it was the three-eyed crow who whispered to him and not some grisly talking corpse. Bran sat on his throne, awaiting the whispers of his teacher. You must learn to look beyond what Brandon Stark wishes to see and the people his heart longs for. Forget your brothers and sisters, you do not need them now. Put them aside and follow the roots to farther places, to strange forests and woods, and they will become as familiar to you as the home you once knew, said the Lord, hoarsely. Bran did not know how he was meant to find some place he'd never been to before, or how, once he got there, he would know where he was, but he could try. It came to him quickly, all at once, like always. He was on an isle surrounded by a great lake of water, and everything was green and lush. Small green men riding elk and wearing horned headdresses tended to the trees around him, clearing the leaves and kneeling to pray. Then there came a skinny brown-haired woman in a blue dress, laughing and spinning across the godswood. Arya, Bran thought, but Arya was younger when last he'd seen her, and she'd never worn her hair so long. Besides, there was a silver-haired man with her, and his sister didn't know any men with silver hair. The man smiled a small smile, and when they stood before the heart tree, the woman took his hands in hers. "I brought no bride's cloak," said the man. "I have no need for a cloak," said the woman, her voice frosted with the accents of the north. "I should rather have your heart. I would cut a notch in mine, and there I will put yours, and you will be a part of me forever." Aunt Lionel, Bran thought suddenly. He knew her voice. But if that was his aunt, then the man was the king. He had seen Rhaegar in Riverrun, but the face of the youth who stood before him now was unlined and smooth, and his long hair was like a cape around his shoulders. He was only a prince then, not the king, Bran remembered. His aunt took the prince's hands in hers, and when she began to press a kiss on his knuckles, they faded into the mist. The clearing was filled with green men after that, and when Bran grew bored he tried to follow the roots through the earth, to some other tree. This air in this forest was not as fresh, nor the trees as well kept. They climbed over one another, as though jostling to reach the sky, and all around him was the earthy odor of wet rotting leaves and the screeches of bats and ravens in the branches. Men with hard faces, lean and hungry, emerged from the mist armed with axes and ropes. Savagely, they hewed down the weirwoods around him and dragged them away beyond his sight. Sentinels and pines grew in their places, and the forest grew as thick as before. The glimpses came faster and faster, till Bran was feeling lost and dizzy. Some great battle was happening out of his sight. He heard the blowing of horns and galloping of horses and a monstrous roar. But then leaves fell around him and the air growing chill and then warm again, and a silver-haired man stood before him, broad and tall, cruel and beautiful. From a black leather scabbard, he drew a slender sword and began to carve into the tree, leaving 13 bleeding wounds. And then the man was gone, and Bran Stark could hear the babbling of a little stream, and it was 4 purple eyes staring at him, not 2. Daenerys. She looked different, short-haired and dressed like a boy, but it was her. She was alive just like Hojan had dreamed. Beside her stood a silver-haired man, one of the princes, but Bran didn't know which. "They see me," he thought, "they are looking right at me." No, he remembered, no one can see you. They don't know you're inside the tree. "It's this one," she said. "Look, here are the marks." Daenerys reached out, and when her hand touched the bark, Bran felt that same hand on him. "The face in this tree has a dark look," said the prince. "It's the old gods." "Do they frighten you?" "It's ghosts," replied the prince, smiling and not answering. "Harrenhal is haunted." "Ghosts or gods, we've come too far." Daenerys sighed, and turned to face the thicket of trees behind her. "We're meant to follow the river road and then south to King's Landing. How did we come so far west?" The prince took one last look at the tree and went to stand by Daenerys. "It's Brightson. They are growing stronger, their wounds are healing, but that dragon goes where he wishes. He needs a rider." "Dragon?" Bran felt his heart leap in his chest. He wanted to stay here and see the dragon. "Please, please, please," he prayed. "Shall you write to your sister once more?" The prince was Aegon then, the prince of Dragonstone. "1,000 words have passed between us, and she is stubborn as an ox and twice as willful." He knelt by the stream, and filled his water skin. "There are times I wish you had been sent 2 dragons and not 3. 3 dragons." Bran wished more than anything he was there. If he came to them as a boy they could send him away, but in Summer's skin no one could stop him. He could leap and bound over the roots, smell out the scent of the dragons in the air, and find them. He wondered if his Robb and Arya would believe him. "I'll never see them again," he remembered, save in the trees. He could tell the reeds though, and maybe it would cheer Hojan. Daenerys shook her head, and seemed sad. "You should wish rather that Viserys had been stronger and lived to fly with us." The prince took a swig from his skin, and together they began to walk away, their forms shifting to mist. "Once you have mastered your gifts, you may look where you will and see what the trees have seen," Lord Brynden had said. What was the good in being inside a weirwood if he couldn't see the things that he wanted, all the things he could never see when he was a boy? The ravens were squawking still. Desperately he chose one, like Leaf and Lord Brynden had taught him, and suddenly he was not a tree looking at a raven but a raven looking at a tree. The song of the stream suddenly grew louder, and the air was full of strange smells. He was too scared to fly in case he fell and woke up in his body in the darkness of the cave, and so he jumped from branch to branch, following the pair as they weaved through the trees. In some places, the woods were dense, the roots of the tree clawing at the ground and closing off clear paths. It made for easy leaps for a raven, but Daenerys and Aegon had a harder time of it, and in many places, the prince held her hand or carried her in his arms. It made Bran feel queer. They came at last to the edge of the Godswood. "The dragon must have 3 heads," said the princess. "What of Prince Doran's children? They are of our blood too. And your uncle Oberyn has many daughters, does he not?" Aegon laughed. "Yes, but none that should have a dragon. Trust me." Daenerys took the water skin from the prince, but did not drink from it. She held it for a moment, and only watched him. "What of your brother?" she asked, at last. The prince was quiet for an awfully long time, and for a moment Bran wondered if he had stumbled into some other dream and missed out on the dragons altogether. He began to think of going back into the tree and seeing what he might find. "What of my brother?" "No," said the Prince of Dragonstone at last. He spoke quietly and haltingly. "No. Never that. I will bear what I must. But I won't bear that. Daenerys, do not speak to me of Jon." "Jon?" Bran asked, not understanding, but it came out a scream. That, the prince and princess heard. They turned to look at him, puzzled. "Do you see that bird?" the prince asked. "Its eyes are red." "It's diseased," said Daenerys distractedly. It was then, too late, that Bran realized he was not alone. Someone else was in the Raven. He tried not to be frightened. The singers who sang the songs of the earth had taught the first men to send messages by Raven, when the birds could speak the words. It was just an old singer in the Raven, a shadow on the soul. Only, it didn't feel that way. The Prince of Dragonstone wore a sword on his belt and a bow over his back. He reached for an arrow, and in a blink, Bran was back in the chamber. With fear in his heart, he looked over at Lord Brynden seated on his throne. "What did you see?" he asked, like so many nights before. "I saw Princess Daenerys. She's married to my brother Robb. She was with the Prince of Dragonstone. They're together in Harrenhal," said Bran, heart racing. "I saw a man and woman as well," said Lord Brynden. "It was him that was in the Raven." Bran had felt him, as sure as he had the spirit of the bird. "What else?" "I'm not sure," Bran admitted. He was confused, and weary. Slipping into Summer's skin had become as easy for him as slipping on a pair of breeches once had been. In the cave, changing his own skin for a raven's night black feathers had been harder, but not as hard as he had feared. But it was a different thing altogether to go from boy, to tree, to bird. He had never done that before, but he hadn't seen the dragons after all, and now he wanted to rest. "They were speaking about dragons," he continued. "There are 3 of them, I think, only. I didn't see them. You have looked with the eyes of the tree, and those of a raven, but you are pulled from year to year, moment to moment, like a boy stumbling through the dark, frightened by anything that brushes up against you. There is nothing to fear from the past, be it yesterday or 1,000 years ago. Go back, learn to recognize the tree, know its branches and the patterns in its bark. And then pick a bird, or a bat, and look again." Bran's mouth felt dry. "You said a part of me would remain in summer if my flesh were to die. What happens if the raven dies?" "You would open his eyes and be back in the cave. You would pick another one and walk this tale in the Godswood again. Help me to be brave," Bran prayed. He was back in Harrenhal again, looking with the eyes of the tree. He tried to remember Lord Brynden's lessons. There was Daenerys, there was the prince, looking at him. No, the tree. "It's this one," Daenerys said again. "Look, here are the marks. Ghosts or gods?" He looked for his raven once more, and this time its eyes were red. A boy might choose to share a skin with Lord Brynden and his bird again, to be comforted knowing he is not alone. But Bran was almost a man grown, and so he picked another one. He followed them as he had before, over root and branch. "No," the prince said once more, "never that. I won't bear that. Don't speak of Jon." Bran stayed quiet this time, and the prince did not reach for his arrows. "As you command," said Daenerys, and there was something edged in her tone. The prince looked chastened. "Forgive me. We should speak freely to one another. When Daenerys did not reply, he went to one knee before her. Forgive me, he said again. I was rude. Yes, she agreed. And it is you who should command me. You are the mistress here. Me. You are the prince that was the promised. You are the mother of the dragons. Who else but you? No, Daenerys put her hand on his shoulder. Whatever I am, there is you. And there is one other, someone else who we can trust with all our hearts. Bran felt adrift. He could make nothing of their words, and they were lingering too far at the edge of the Godswood. Soon they would be out in the clearing and he could not follow. Something shifted in the wind, and the world around him plunged into darkness. There is nothing to be frightened of, Bran reminded himself. The past cannot hurt me. Darkness will make me strong. With his raven eyes, he looked up, and there it was, a black dragon, wings outstretched as he flew, blotting out the sun. And there, another, and another, 3 in all, as large as clouds, more terrible than anything in old Nan's dreams, but beautiful too, scales shifting like hundreds and hundreds of precious jewels. Suddenly, they seemed to look at him with molten eyes, though they were leagues above, and Bran felt that they saw him, not the raven whose skin he wore, but the boy hiding inside. And then he was back in the cave once more, sweat on his brow, his hands shaking in his weirwood throne. Dragons, Bran said, and it came out a hoarse breath. Dragons, Lord Brynden agreed. Think of all you have learned. Do you understand now? Yes, yes. Somehow he did. Notes. Thank you so much for the overwhelming and kind response to the last chapter and to my story. It's been so wonderful to get back to writing this, and you all have given me so much inspiration and a burst of creativity through your comments and interactions. Thank you. Chapter 23, Barristan 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The streets of King's Landing had always been raucous and noisy. Today, they teemed with watchmen, moving in pairs through the alleys in their gold cloaks and shirts of black ringmail, iron cudgels never far from their hands. In the Riverlands, Sir Barristan had seen how the sight of dragons could drive men to tears and panic, and that would not do now. Today was meant as a hero's return, a celebration of the victories on Pike and the Wall and the return of the dragons to House Targaryen. It was the king's command that they came to the city now, so the court may see the creatures at last and Aegon begin to marshal forces for his father's battles to come beyond the wall. Streamers of red, gold, and orange hung from market stalls, and barefooted children ran around waving the hand-sewn dragon banners. Servant girls from the castle passed out trays of pastries to the small folk, cream swans, lemon cakes in the shape of roses, spiced honey biscuits and apple crisps, and sweet blackberry tarts. The great mass of people was gathered on Rhaenys Hill outside the ruin that had been the dragon pit, for it provided the best view of the city and the dragon's flight. It was where the royal dragons dwelt in days of yore, a cavernous dwelling with iron doors so wide that 30 knights could ride through them abreast. Its huge dome had collapsed to ruin, however, and its bronze doors had been closed for a century. The beasts would not be resting there. It was ill-omened, Daenerys decreed, and she had the right of it, for it marked the dark days of war and death. None of the pit dragons had ever reached the size of their ancestors, and though Sir Barristan did not know whether Daenerys' dragons would continue to grow, they were not suited for enclosure within walls. They preferred the wide open spaces where they could hunt and nest, and this close to Dragonstone the princess had said that they would not linger long but fly across the sea. The Isle of Sulphur, Brimstone and Salt Sea was their home, as it once had been hers, and the place they loved the best. It had stopped burning at last, he'd been told, though no boat now dared dock there. Like Summerhall, it had become a place for ghosts and monsters. Sir Barristan and his men moved quickly through the city, riding swiftly through manses and arbours and granaries, brick storehouses and timbered inns and merchants' stalls, and alleys so narrow they rode in a single file. The great shadow that marked the arrival of the dragons fell on them before they reached Aegon's high hill. Sir Barristan braced himself for the fear to take the city, for screams and running footsteps, but the gold cloaks had the streets well in order. The bells of the great September of Baelor were joyously thundering, and drifting in from somewhere was the sound of singing voices. They rode in silence up where the Red Keep loomed, the great castle of 7 huge drum towers crowned with iron ramparts, an immense grim barbican, vaulted halls and covered bridges, barracks and dungeons and granaries, massive curtain walls studded with archers' nests, all fashioned of pale red stone. The portcullis were up, though they were pulled down behind them as they crossed. He swung down from his horse, handing his reins to a stable boy, and climbed the endless steps to the Red Keep. Sir Barristan had ridden as fast as he dared in the crowded streets of King's Landing, but the dragons and their riders were faster. When at last he arrived in the throne room, it was thick with courtiers. He walked between them, responding to greetings as he worked his way to the front. There were the Dornish lords, the fiery-tempered Harmon Euler and his brother Ulwick, Sir Aaron Corgyle, Miria Jordain and Anders Urenwood chief among them. Raymond Diary was looking at the dragon skulls that lined the hall in wonder, as though they too may come alive, while Adrian Celtigar, the Red Crab, leaned on one of his kin and whispered something unheard. The unease among the lords of the Reach did not go unnoticed by Sir Barristan. Loras Tyrell, who had vowed to join the King's Guard upon his sister's marriage to the prince, stood at their fore, his face still and guarded. It was the hand of the king who had sat in the Iron Throne in the king's absence. Today, however, Prince Aegon sat high upon the immense ancient seat of Aegon the Conqueror, the ironwork monstrosity of spikes and jagged edges and grotesquely twisted metal. He wore the prince's circlet his father gifted him upon his knighthood, of heavy gold adorned with red rubies, and looked kingly in a black doublet with red gold dragon fastenings. Seated below him at his right hand was the Princess Daenerys, similarly resplendent in a black gown, and atop her head sat a crown wrought in the shape of a three-headed dragon. Through the high narrow windows, the light of midday sun spilled out across them. Aegon did not sit easily in his throne, leaning forward stiffly. Sir Barristan had not seen a king nor prince who did. Between each finger was a blade, the points of twisted swords fanning out like talons from arms of the throne. Even after 3 centuries, some were still sharp enough to cut. The Iron Throne was full of traps for the unwary. The songs said it had taken 1,000 blades to make it, heated white-hot in the furnace breath of Balerion the Black Dread. The hammering had taken 59 days. The end of it was this hunched black beast made of razor edges and barbs and ribbons of sharp metal. Aerys cut himself so often men took to calling him King Scab, and Maegor the Cruel was murdered in that chair, if the tales could be believed. But never Rhaegar. Elia sat at the council table beneath the throne. Sir Barristan was glad for that. The queen was level-headed and wise, and where many said Princess Rhaenys was the king's joy, it was to the queen's skirts that Prince Aegon had often clung, as young boys were wont to do. A certain strength had returned to her of late, and some men said that with it her beauty too had flowered. Sir Barristan could not say. It was Ashara Dayne he had loved. She had been in Stark all these past long years, never leaving Dorne. Even after all these years, he could still recall her smile, the sound of her laughter. Daenerys had the same haunting purple eyes. Sometimes when the princess looked at him, he felt as if he were looking at Ashara's daughter. With the queen was her brother, the Red Viper of Dorne, Lord John Connington, the aged Walter Went, Montford Valerian, and Maester Marwyn. Lord Tyrell's seat was empty. Sir Barristan took his post beside Jaime Lannister and looked out across the crowd. The prince finished speaking of the victory against the Ironborn and the smashing of the wildlings and the so-called king beyond the wall before coming at last to the dragons. My lords, you have seen the dragons with your own eyes. They have returned to us, 3 beasts to rival Balerion, Vigor and Meraxes. But the gods did not send them to us only for the glory of our house. Their fate is tied to that of all of Westeros. The prince had been well taught. He did not shout to be heard, as weaker men were wont to do, but his voice filled the hall all the same, and in it was a tone not unlike the music of his father. It is north now we must look, where a danger has gathered unseen. My father sends me now with this message. Undead things are gathering once more beyond the wall, the creatures that your ancestors called the Others who once brought cold and darkness to your lands. They will melt before dragon fire, but dragons cannot defeat them alone. My father is at the wall now, learning all that he can of them. One day soon, he will call on you to fulfill your oaths to him once more and join us with your swords. The story had been told before, when the brother of the Night's Watch first arrived with the grotesque hand, still moving in its box. The hand was brought forth before the court, where the Black Brother told his tale. Some had laughed, thinking it some jape, others cursed and called it black magic. Few, though, had believed it. They were the monsters in every child's dreams, the White Walkers of the wood, the cold shadows riding their giant ice spiders, hungry for blood. But they were gone 8,000 years ago, if they had ever lived at all. The king and prince had left soon after for Dragonstone, and the court had been quick to forget, their minds turning to war and dragons. Many still do not believe, Sir Barristan thought. The knights and lords did not dare so much as smile nor whisper, but there was a shuffling as though they were making space to hide their thoughts. For his own part, Sir Barristan was a simple knight. He believed it, because his king did, but not in his heart of hearts. There were some things a man must see to know. It would be the same for these lords, he suspected. They would not be easily compelled to call their banners once more and march north to fight against a faceless enemy. The king's herald stepped forward and his voice boomed out. If any man in this hall has other matters to set before the Prince of Dragonstone, let him speak now or go forth and hold his silence. Lords and knights moved and stepped aside to let Baelor Hightower pass. That was an ill beginning. The eldest son and heir of Lord Lytton Hightower, the man they called Baelor Brightsmile, was a splendid knight, but he was uncle to Margaery Tyrell. And today he did not smile. "My prince," he called out in a powerful voice. "Sir Baelor Hightower," the herald called. He stopped under the throne. "As it please your grace, many among us cannot help but wonder where these beasts have come from." "The gods, your grace says, and surely they are a godly gift, but my father says from the high tower they saw a green light upon Dragonstone. Many men at court saw the same from the windows of King's Landing. Even now, a strange heat sits upon the stones, I am told, and the towers are destroyed." The prince inclined his head towards Daenerys, and the princess spoke for the first time. "Dragonstone is destroyed, good sir, though it pains me to say so. The dragons rose from those stones and were reborn in fire and blood. As was Princess Daenerys," Aegon said, "for she woke the dragons and emerged atop the Black One who she has called Shadow Tamer, unburnt." There was no use denying it, Sir Barristan knew that as well as the prince. All had heard of how the princess had disappeared in the days after the fall of Dragonstone, and many in the Crown lands had seen strange creatures flying overhead, and heard whispers of dragons before she was found. But the story, even the smallest parts of it, were filled with things that he suspected none would know, save for those who had witnessed it. And the birth of the dragons was Daenerys' secret alone. Sir Baelor's mouth was a thin line. "Forgive me, your grace, but it is a strange tale. If it was wildfire that birthed the beasts, none could survive the blaze, and the princess, while lovely to behold, is only a young girl. What is happening here?" Sir Barristan wondered. He looked once more at the Lords of the Reach. For these long years past they had been some of King Rhaegar's staunchest allies. They were testing that allegiance now, showing the prince what it would mean to have them as enemies. "A young girl I may be, but the blood of Aegon the dragon flows in my veins," the princess said, boldly. In that moment, he saw no trace now of the furtive child she had been. "You came asking after the truth. Seek it no more. We have told it." Lord Paxter Redwyne was announced next. He had not been often at court this year. After the pleasantries, he asked after Viserys Targaryen. "The dragons fly over our heads even now," said Lord Redwyne, "and they lingered long in the Riverlands. Yet, we heard tell Prince Viserys perished in their fire upon Dragonstone. How are we to secure our lands and people from them?" Prince Aegon looked to Daenerys once more. If the mention of her brother disturbed her, the princess hid it well. "The dragons do not kill or destroy for sport," she said. "And they do not linger long in places where they find men. Even now, they fly for the Kingswood, and soon they will be across Blackwater Bay. They will trouble neither you nor your people, my lord." The Dornish lords pushed forward after that, with words of flattery and praise thick on their tongues, until at last Loras Tyrell, the youth they called the Knight of Flowers, was announced. The youngest son of Mace Tyrell, Sir Loras was slim as a sword, lithe and fit, and one of the best swordsmen Sir Barristan had seen. The boy, at least, was clever enough to smile. "It gladdens my heart to see you well, brother Loras," Tyrell said. "We have worried for you since your fall on Pike, my sister Margaery chief among us. Even now, my father writes that she spends her days in Highgarden September praying for your health, and speaks of little more than the day when at last she can call you husband." "Thank you for your kind words, sir, and for your sister's prayers," said the prince, courteously. "My father and my brothers are also eager to know when that day will come. King Rhaegar said the end of the year, but the end of the year has come and passed, and the war is done. The true war is just beginning, said the prince. But I hear your words, sir. You will answer soon enough. He said little and less, and it was not enough to placate the Knight of Flowers. But there were more men who wished to come forward, and the afternoon grew long. When the court was at last dismissed, the prince was quick to descend the throne. He looked in need of a hot meal and a soft feather bed, but the queen quickly moved to him with a request to join her in the council room. Sir Barristan was similarly commanded. He watched as the queen's ladies emerged to escort Princess Daenerys to her rooms before walking to the council chambers, the hallways around it flanked with Dornish guards. A strange sight in King's Landing, where the king and prince were careful of accusations of Dornish influence, wary of the plots and rumors that plagued Daeron the Good's court and Prince Baelor. It did not bode well. The room was richly furnished. Mirish carpets covered the floor instead of rushes, and in one corner 100 fabulous beasts cavorted in bright paints on a carved screen from the Summer Isles. The walls were hung with tapestries from Norphos and Qohor and Lys, and a pair of Valyrian sphinxes flanked the door, eyes of polished garnet smouldering in black marble faces. The queen was seated at the head of a long table littered with papers, candles, and blocks of sealing wax. The Red Viper sat at her side. The Prince of Dragonstone was dear to his uncles, a source of consternation for the Tyrells who had tried through his boyhood to replace his companions with men of the Reach. As a man, Aegon had been adept at pacifying his betrothed's kin. He has made an end to that, Sir Barristan thought. He stood before them now. He had taken off his circlet and was running his fingers through his hair. That was foolishness from start to finish, the queen was saying. Like King Rhaegar, Elia did not let her anger often show. There was a certain bite to her tone now, however. The Red Viper, however, was not similarly reserved. He gave the prince a withering look. You seated Daenerys at your side as though she were your queen, crowned. The crown was a gift, said Aegon, defiantly. She is a princess by blood, the daughters of kings, what of it? It is poor payment for the dragon she gave me. You did not do it for courtesy's sake. If you desire her so, then have her. There are places in King's Landing where even a prince might sate himself in secret, began the Red Viper. No, said the queen, in a voice that broached no argument. Kings and princes must put the needs of the realm before their own desires. Aegon knows this. One night of embraces, or 100, is not worth the stain you would bring on yourself or Daenerys, who Robb Stark calls wife. It is the needs of the realm I'm thinking of, mother, not mine. Do you not think she is worthy of a seat at my right hand? You would rather see Margaery Tyrell there, even now. A boy might sit and dream and grow wroth at roads not taken, but you are a boy no longer. You must wake and face the day, no matter how harsh its light. Dragons or not, Daenerys is wed. And bedded, added the Red Viper. Her son is auburn-haired and blue-eyed. The very image of his father, I am told, save for a sliver of silver in his curls. The prince touched at the scar on his upper lip. He had taken a wound there when he was a boy after a tumble down the steps in the Red Keep. A scar formed after the cut was stitched up, and as a child he'd made a habit of sticking his tongue out of his mouth and trying to reach it. It was naught but a white mark now, a blemish on his handsome face, that he often mindlessly pinched when he was deep in thought. Now that the prince was a man, there were many maidens who wished to kiss that scar, most likely. That child is my cousin, said the prince. I bear no ill will towards him, nor his father. Robb Stark may fall in battle or live to be 100, but I will have no part in his death. And one day his son will be Lord of Winterfell and my kin will sit in the seats of Stark, Tully and Martell. I will be bound to them not only by oaths of allegiance but blood, and they will be bound to me in turn. The Red Viper quirked an eyebrow. Yes, we know. We did not call you kinslayer, nor child butcher. Say what you mean to do and say it plain. Kinslayer. Sir Barristan thought back to what the freakish creature on High Heart had said. Kinslayer, Kingslayer. He had chewed on that for a while, unsure of what it meant. The nonsense of a mad woman, like as not, but it bothered him all the same. 2 years ago, yes, there was no bride such as Margaery Tyrell. She brings with her the strength of Highgarden and the Reach and Loras Tyrell's sword, but I look at these things now and I think she is nothing, they are nothing. The queen interrupted, her voice as sharp as a blade. Sir Barristan, What did my son say to Lord Tyrell's invitation? Mother. The prince sent word that he has been commanded to return to King's Landing, your grace, Sir Barristan said. You will not marry Margaery Tyrell, said the queen, turning again to her son. And so, what shall you do? Your uncle and I are weary of your hints and winks. I mean to marry Daenerys. There was no shame to the prince's admission. He held his head high and ignored the piercing looks of his mother and uncle. Yes, he is a prince of hints and winks, Sir Barristan thought, but he does not delight in scheming for its own sake, and now he had said plain for all to hear what all suspected. The Targaryens of old practiced polygamy. The faith decrees it is a sin, but what can they say now that the dragons have returned? The queen's face was still, but the Red Viper laughed, a raw snort of amusement bursting through his nose. Do you take yourself for Aegon the Conqueror? He asked. No, I am not that Aegon, said the prince. Daenerys is. There was no more laughter then. The queen sat there, as if made of stone. She had looked thus at Harrenhal, Sir Barristan remembered, the day Rhaegar urged his horse past her to lay the Queen of Beauty's laurel in Lyanna Stark's lap. There is no path I can see to set aside her marriage to Stark, Aegon sighed, and rubbed his forehead. I turned it over 1,000 times in my mind until I came at last to see that there is no need. It matters not if she keeps him as husband, only that the dragons and any eggs remain in King's Landing, where our children and our children's children will have them as birthright. It's the only way I can see. We are of the same blood and fruit of the same tree, but Daenerys is everything I never was. The prophecy was true, mother, in its own way, only father had it wrong. It's not me, nor Jon. It was her all along. Something dangerous and cold flashed in the Red Viper's eyes. You would wage 3 wars, then, one with the Tyrells and another with the Starks and a third with the Faith. What do you take them for, Egg? You think one glance at your dragon, and they will run back to their keeps, and live to serve a prince and one day king who has disgraced them thus. Even Aegon the Conqueror did not win his wars with dragons alone. They will fight you, thousands will die, and in the end you will have no throne to sit in. Perhaps. And if I don't wed Dany, it may end the same. The dragons. You don't understand, they are bound to her, all 3. I ride Sea Flame and we know one another, but... The prince searched for the words. I feel it. The riderless dragon, when we fly, he trails after her. They long for her, as a child longs for their mother. The Red Viper furrowed his brow. No Targaryen has ever ridden a second dragon, while their first lives. I am not speaking of riding, Aegon said sharply. I am speaking of something deeper. The dragons are hers no matter who rides them. And if she returns north to her Stark husband and Stark son, who can say will happen in a year or 2? What about in 10, or 20, when her son is a man and Northmen begin to whisper treason in his ear? There is a reason my ancestors wed brother to sister. The Starks cannot hold a dragon. Few have failed to notice you have 3 dragons and only 2 riders, continued the Red Viper. What shall you do, when the third is claimed? Shall you wed its rider too? No. It is Daenerys, she is the key, Aegon countered. The third rider will matter little and less when we are together. Barristan Selmy had known many kings. He had been born during the troubled reign of Aegon the Unlikely, beloved by the common folk, had received his knighthood at his hands. Aegon's son Jaehaerys had bestowed the White Cloak on him when he was 23, after he slew Maelys the Monstrous during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. In that same cloak he had stood beside the Iron Throne as madness consumed Jaehaerys' son Aerys. Stood, and saw, and heard, and yet did nothing. He served and loved King Rhaegar, who for all the mistakes of his youth, had ruled wisely over a 20-year peace where summer reigned, when bellies were full and harvests were plenty. The keeping of his vows had grown easy these last years, but uncertainty was growing within him. The king must return to King's Landing, he thought. Or else his son would break his peace. Sir Barristan wondered why his king had given him this command, why he was not at his side now. Rhaegar would be better served by dispatching a knight to his son's side who knows the king's mind better, who could speak with his voice now. It was Arthur Dayne who should be with Aegon. But he had been chosen. And now the queen invited him into the room. Perhaps for his counsel. Perhaps for his very presence, so Aegon might remember that there are those around him who would help him. Also that he can be the eyes and ears of the king, so he may report back what happened here, and add his voice to that of the queen. Whatever it was, he would protect Rhaegar's throne as he had vowed to do, and his son. When Daenerys disappeared upon Dragonstone, her husband was ready for war. Speak to Lord Connington and ask him how Stark insulted him in Winterfell. He would have ridden to King's Landing and called for justice, if the Ironborn had not attacked. Hear my words, nephew, Robb Stark will not sit by and watch as his wife takes a second husband, no matter how princely, said the Red Viper. That was true. The Northerners had taken to calling Robb Stark the Young Wolf, for the massive direwolf that fought at his side and his bravery at Moat Cailin and upon Pike. They were loyal to Ned Stark, but they would rise up in his son's defense too if he asked it of them. Why have you come all this way to share your plans? The Queen asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. She had come to see something that Sir Barristan did not yet understand. Why not fly away together and wed her in some secret place, and ask for our forgiveness when you return? I will not run off into the night, Aegon said, color rising in his cheeks. When I wed Daenerys, I mean to do it in the great September of Baelor, as befits a future queen. But the time is not right, I can feel it. I thought to wait until the north is weaker, when winter is at their door, but there is no honor in that. The queen turned at last to the knight. Sir Barristan, yours is a storied career. Tell us, what do you make of this? A starved man would do almost anything for a piece of bread, Sir Barristan said, carefully, his tone giving no hint of his true feelings. Aegon would be his king one day, if he lived long enough to see it. There is much and more the North might do, when winter comes at last and they face war beyond the wall. But even if they are on their knees, it will be bitter to swallow. If the war is won, the North and the Reach will remain a thorn in the side of House Targaryen for generations to come. Aegon was listening intently, but he looked ill at ease with each word. His Grace the Prince is wise to be patient, but I do not believe Lord Tyrell will be similarly inclined. The wrath of the Reach may fall on King's Landing long before the battle begins in the north. You are right, sir. I saw their anger today in their questions. They asked me of Viserys, as though they cared for him, as though he were not my uncle first and Daenerys' brother and our blood. Sir Loras too was wroth, said Aegon, bitterly. He shook his head, and touched his lip again. But I don't think it will come to war. They will lose, as the King of the Reach did in the Field of Fire hundreds of years past. You reminded me of another Aegon, sir, Aegon the Unlikely, and his disobedient children. Broken betrothals, almost all, but even that did not come to war, and he held no dragons. Besides, who would stand with them? Rhaenys will make sure Edmure Tully holds firm, I'm sure of it. Arryn is old and cautious, and Lord Lannister unlikely to take a risk with so little to gain. Stark has bled in 100 places from the Ironborn, and he cannot bring his armies south now or risk severing them in two. But I would have my uncle mass his hosts in the Boneway and the Prince's Pass if I could, so the Reach sees a little of what they might face if they dare rise up against us. There was little chance of that. Prince Doran would not move now. It would be the first arrow loosed, and he was not the sort of man to do that easily. The Queen seemed to ignore him. A wedding needs bride and groom both, she said, instead. Is Daenerys willing? Aegon frowned, tensing. I haven't spoken to her of it. But I can compel her to agree. Compel. The word spoke volumes. All the better, because you are not king, said the Queen, coolly. And you may not be if you continue down this path. Your father knows of Daenerys and the dragons. When he saw her fly, did he write some secret letter to Lord Tyrell setting aside your betrothal? No, the prince admitted. Sir Barristan. Not to my knowledge, your grace. And did he command you to wed Daenerys? The Queen asked. No, said Aegon, color rising in his cheeks. Father will understand. I meant to fly to the wall and speak to him, only, perhaps it is better for me to stay here with Daenerys. She's little known in King's Landing, and if she's to be queen one day, we must remedy that. But I can't trust this to a raven. I thought perhaps one of my cousins might go. Quentyn is to be wed, he cannot, and Arianne mourns Viserys. I thought perhaps Tywin. Elia and Oberyn exchanged a look. Any woman at the wall will raise suspicions, but she is so sweet and gentle, we might send her with a company of healers and say she is merely one of many, Egon said, softly. For now, Sir Barristan said nothing. Like the king, he had little love for the bastards they called the Sand Snakes. What is left then to discuss? The Queen rose. I have other matters to attend to and you are dismissed. Mother, the prince began. She silenced him with a raise of her hand. The king's interests lie beyond the wall. He is there now with your bastard brother, as is Lord Stark and his northern armies. When you start your war and bleed his kingdom for naught, perhaps he will look to his other son. You would do well to think on that, rather than your aunt. Prince Egon knew better than to argue now. He did as he was bid, and once he was gone from the room, Sir Barristan was alone with his queen and her brother. Elia seemed weary, in both body and spirit. Slowly, she sunk back into her chair. Do you think I frightened him, sir? She said, with a half-smile. Sir Barristan smiled back, I do not know. The prince has grown braver of late, your grace. The Red Viper smirked at that. Tell me, sir, what do you make of Daenerys? She has a strong spirit, Sir Barristan said. He had not seen what occurred atop Dragonstone's towers, but she had not only survived it but done what no man or mage had in a century and a half. He had not often seen her daunted these last few months. Whatever task our king sets out before her, she will strive to do. So, she is dutiful. Elia said. Barristan nodded. And will she obey Egon, if the madness takes him and he tells her they must be wed? That I cannot foretell, your grace, forgive me. But I saw her with Robb Stark in Riverrun. The boy was quiet and cold. I know the princess nursed him herself on Pike when he took a wound. Even her parting from Arya had been difficult in its own way. The Stark girl at last left for Winterfell, and the princess had sent her with some sewing she had made for her son, and some small, knitted things. There is a fondness there, perhaps, though most of all she wishes for her son. If it means parting from her son for good, I do not think the prince will find her easy to convince. There are women who would set aside all, their dignity or even the welfare of their children, for the promise of a crown. Is Daenerys the sort? Sir Barristan wondered if it was Lyanna Stark the Queen thought of now. The name had not been heard in her presence in years, not since that first terrible year when King Rhaegar had brought his mistress to live at court. When she left for the Kingswood, so too did any mention of her, as though a stain had been scrubbed away. I do not think she loves power for its own sake, your grace, he said, carefully. Otherwise, she would have seized it when she alone held the dragons. Nor would she have willingly taught the prince what she had learned of dragon lore. For a moment, the queen was quiet. The king has tasked you with protecting Egon from harm, she said. Now he needs protecting from himself. He's scared, and for good reason, but it has been many years since I have seen him like this. Even the wisest among us can be driven by fear towards disaster. Oberyn will go to him soon, but I would ask you to watch him, sir, guard him closely. All at once, he seems so very young to me. When he returned at last to the White Sword Tower, he was bone-tired and weary and alone. Save for Jaime Lannister, his other brothers were at the wall with their king. The room was round, its walls of whitewashed stone hung with white woolen tapestries. White wool hangings covered the walls, and there was a white shield and 2 crossed longswords mounted above the hearth. The chair behind the table was old black oak, with cushions of blanched cowhide, the leather worn thin. It formed the first floor of White Sword Tower, a slender structure of 4 stories built into an angle of the castle wall overlooking the bay. The undercroft held arms and armor, the second and third floors the small spare sleeping cells of the 6 brothers of the Kingsguard. In the center was a table of old weirwood, pale as bone, carved in the shape of a huge shield supported by 3 white stallions. By tradition the Lord Commander sat at the top of the shield, and the brothers 3 to a side, on the rare occasions when all 7 were assembled. The book that rested by his elbow was massive, 2 feet tall and a foot and a half wide, 1,000 pages thick, fine white vellum bound between covers of bleached white leather with gold hinges and fastenings. The Book of the Brothers was its formal name, but more often it was simply called the White Book. Within the White Book was the history of the Kingsguard. Every knight who'd ever served had a page, to record his name and deeds for all time. On the top left-hand corner of each page was drawn the shield the man had carried at the time he was chosen, inked in rich colors. Down in the bottom right corner was the shield of the Kingsguard, snow white, empty, pure. The upper shields were all different, the lower shields were all the same. In the space between were written the facts of each man's life and service. The heraldic drawings and illuminations were done by septons sent from the Great September of Baylor 3 times a year, but it was the duty of the Lord Commander to keep the entries up to date. Sir Barristan opened the book to his page. The shield atop showed the arms of House Selmy, 3 stalks of wheat, yellow, on a brown field. Sir Barristan of House Selmy, firstborn son of Sir Lionel Selmy of Harvest Hall. Served as squire to Sir Manfred Swan. Named the Bold in his 10th year, when he donned borrowed armor to appear as a mystery knight in the tourney at Blackhaven, where he was defeated and unmasked by Duncan, Prince of Dragonflies. Knighted in his 16th year by King Aegon V Targaryen, after performing great feats of prowess as a mystery knight in the winter tourney at King's Landing, defeating Prince Duncan the Small and Sir Duncan the Tall, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Slew Maelys the Monstrous, last of the Blackfyre pretenders, in single combat during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Defeated Lormel Longlance and Cedric Storm, the bastard of Bronze Eggett. Named to the Kingsguard in his 23rd year, by Lord Commander Sir Gerald Hightower. Defended the passage against all challengers in the tourney of the Silver Bridge. Victor in the melee at Maidenpool. Brought King Aerys II to safety during the defiance of Duskendale, despite an arrow wound in the chest. Avenged the murder of his sworn brother, Sir Gawain Gaunt. Rescued Lady Jane Swan and her sceptre from the Kingswood Brotherhood, defeating Simon Toyne and the Smiling Knight, and slaying the former. In the Old Town tourney, defeated and unmasked the mystery knight Blackshield, revealing him as the Bastard of Uplands. Sole champion of Lord Stephan's tourney at Storm's End, whereat he unhorsed Lord Robert Baratheon, Prince Oberyn Martell, Lord Lytton Hightower, Lord John Connington, Lord Jason Mallister, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Served King Rhaegar Targaryen upon his assumption of the crown and was named Lord Commander of the Kingsguard after the death of Sir Gerald Hightower. Champion of the tourney at Sunspear in his 45th year. Champion of the tourney at King's Landing in his 50th year. Served in the honor guard that brought Princess Rhaenys Targaryen to Riverrun to wed Lord Edmure Tully. The earlier part of his career had been entered by Sir Gerald Hightower in a big forceful hand. His own smaller and more elegant writing took over with the account of his rise to Lord Commander. Sir Barristan picked up the quill. Led the search for Princess Daenerys Targaryen following the fall of Dragonstone, which sighted her in Crackclaw Point. Witnessed dragons in flight, named Shadow Tamer, Brightzone, and Sea Flame. Led the attack on Old Wyk during Balon Greyjoy's rebellion. Served in the honor guard that brought Aegon Targaryen, Prince of Dragon, and Princess Daenerys Targaryen to Riverrun and King's Landing. He stopped there. Perhaps one of his brothers would write the rest of this tale. His rooms were at the topmost floor, which was given over entirely to the Lord Commander's apartments. He climbed the steps slowly. They were spare, though spacious, and were above the outer walls, which meant he had a view of the sea. He looked across Blackwater Bay now, instinctively searching for the dragons. One on such clear night in Riverrun, their silhouettes had blotted out even the stars, and there was naught but blackness and the glimmer of their eyes. But they were gone, hunting in the Kingswood, or perhaps away to Dragonstone, where even now they burrowed beneath the dragonment until their riders had need to call them again in their secret way. It was for the best, he thought as he drifted off to sleep. It meant the riders could not leave the Red Keep without him knowing. Targaryens he knew well, but Targaryens atop dragons he feared might prove beyond him. Tonight, he would rest. Tonight, he could sleep, and tomorrow he would rise, protect his prince, and do what he could to keep war at bay. Notes. Hello everyone. Thank you, as always, for your comments on the last chapter. You all have been so important to keeping this story going. I've had this finished for a few days, but I've been feeling quite nervous about putting it up. I really hope you enjoy this latest installment. I know Aegon is quite a divisive figure who, for better or worse, is trying to navigate a truly unprecedented situation, the birth of dragons, Dany's strange bond with them, his own dragon riding, what his father's goals are at the Wall, his own status as a prince etc., and things he has reached a solution that resolves some, but not all, of these issues. Inadvertently, exploring the reaction to Dany having dragons in this world has been for me an interesting look at Targaryen family politics. There's an interesting meta on Tumblr I'll link if I find again about how the loss of dragons meant a loss of agency for Targaryen women, and I think read a certain way. This fic is also very much about Dany's agency, with the core difference that she does have a dragon, and a massive one at that. Aegon is pushing the borders of what he thinks she'll accept before things get truly nuclear. But I'm going on too long and should just press post. Things are going to quickly be heating up once more, and like in canon, Barristan is going to begin to play a more proactive role. We're also going to be getting a Dany chapter rather soon. I have a large part of it written out, but I'm not sure if it'll be the next one or the one after that. Thank you again. Chapter 24, Daenerys X. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. In King's Landing, sleep did not come easy to Dany. A pretty, brown-haired Dornish girl named Lara was sent to be her handmaiden and to keep her company, but she was too shy to speak and had fallen asleep as soon as she blew out the candles. Daenerys lay beside her, tossing and turning. When at last she shut her eyes, she tried to think of home. She imagined each of Dragonstone's rooms, one by one, the smell in the air, the sounds of the storms in Blackwater Bay. But her thoughts turned to how it had been when she had last seen it, a burning pile of stone and ash. She tried to think of Winterfell instead, but the Stark's grey castle had never felt like home. Her son was within those walls though, walking now, perhaps speaking. Atop her dragon, the pain of their parting was dulled. Everything seemed to melt away then. But she felt it now, sharp as a knife between her ribs, made all the worse when she thought of Robb's letter. She had read it so many times she could recite it as faithfully as the words of a prayer. I looked at you and it was warm as summer. It had awoken something in her that had long been sleeping and still. Robb had first stirred it those short years ago when they first traveled to Winterfell, and she rode with him atop his horse, her breasts pressed against his back and her arms around his waist. He was cold and distant then, but being so close it thrilled and embarrassed her all the same. For a foolish moment too long, she had thought on Pike as she nursed him that he might recover and they might lay together, and perhaps even that his seed might quicken and she would grow with child once more. It was a silly dream. She had abandoned one child, she thought, and couldn't bear to leave behind another, motherless and fatherless both. Besides, it didn't matter in the end. Robb had awoken, and Aegon had healed quicker, and she flew across Iron Man's Bay before they could so much as speak. Even now, however, she put her hand above her empty womb. She imagined what it would be to turn over in her feather bed now and find Robb's body there, not that of her handmaiden. She would wake him gently, kiss the back of his neck, and then. No. No. There was no use. She slid from the bed, instead stepped out into the balcony. The cool air felt good on her skin. From here, she could see nothing of the city that lay beyond, only the faint glow of torches below, the drawbridge raised over the deep dry moat, lined with spikes, and walls all around. Daenerys tried to remind herself why she was here. Somewhere beyond the walls were 1,000 red roofs. And beneath those roofs, a hungry child was crying for milk. Somewhere an old woman lay dying. Somewhere a man and a maid embraced, and fumbled at each other's clothes with eager hands. And I am up here, alone. All across Westeros it was the same. When the dead things came, they might all be washed away. First the wall, and with it the north and then the rest of Westeros. Lord Mormont had warned them, Jon had fought one, and Daenerys had dreamed of them. The birth of her dragons was proof of it, if any doubt remained. And now Rhaegar would have her and Aegon raise an army against them. The thought of it made her feel so weary it almost drove her back to her bed. They spent their days in council meetings and holding audience, and when they were not in the Red Keep they were in King's Landing among the small folk. It had been weeks since they last flew and her dragons had not returned to the city since their arrival. Shadow Tamer and Sea Flame were both in the Kingswood, but Brighton had flown off across the water. A part of her envied them. The sound of a breath woke her from her daydreams. There, standing beside her on the terrace was the one called Quaithe, eyes wet and shiny behind her red lacquer mask. Am I dreaming? You do not dream now. Was she an enemy, or only a dangerous friend? Dany still could not say. What do you want? Why are you here? To show you the way. The woman or ghost took a step forward. Daenerys Targaryen, you must leave this place. Where would you have me go? She asked. To find the lost blade, the one you forged as Azur Ahai did. Bare your breast, and know that I love you best of all that is in this world. Dany was tired of riddles. What blade? Quaithe, I don't understand. To go forward you must go back, and to touch the light you must pass beneath the shadow, the woman said. Wake. You have slept long enough. Quaithe, I. But she was gone. A shadow. A memory. No one. When she was summoned to the council chambers that morning, Dany was tired down to the very roots of her. While Lord John Connington was Roriger's hand, it was Aegon's voice which was law in that room. The hand of the king seemed a prickly sort of man. Upon their meeting, he had discussed with her at length the rude welcome he had been met in Winterfell. But he showed no signs of that with Aegon, looking upon him with a sort of pride, nodding along to his words. The other lords were more difficult to know. There was a closeness between Aegon and his uncle, and Prince Oberyn, more than any man, was bold enough to correct the prince, to guide his decisions into another direction. Sir Barristan dared too to do the same, but only when asked. Lord Valerian she had known from her youth, but he seemed a different man in these rooms, more sombre and difficult to predict, while old Lord Went spoke more than he listened. Maester Marwyn was another sort altogether. His head was too big for his body, and the way it thrust forward from his shoulders, together with that slab of jaw, made him look as if he were about to tear off someone's head. Bristly white hair sprouted from his ears and nostrils. His brow beetled, his nose had been broken more than once, and sour leaf had stained his teeth a mottled red. And Daenerys liked him. He had served Roriger since he became king, after her brother cleared out the court, and as a child she had loved his stories. He was not like other maesters. People said that he kept company with whores and hedge wizards, talked with hairy Ebenes and Summer Islanders in their own tongues, and sacrificed to queer gods at the little sailors' temples down by the wharves. Men spoke of seeing him down in the Undercity, in rat pits and black brothels, consorting with mummers, singers, sellswords, even beggars. Some even whispered that once he had killed a man with his fists. He had spent years in the East mapping distant lands, searching for lost books, and studying with warlocks and shadowbinders, where someone had dubbed him Marwyn the Midge. As the council meeting began and the lords went to take their places, Dany turned to him. Maester, tell me, what is Azur Ahai? At her side, Aegon overheard. Azur Ahai. The long night lasted for generations, the tales say, and came to an end only when a great warrior emerged and led the battle with his blazing sword. In Aes High they call him Azur Ahai. Where did you hear that name? In a dream. The maester answered before she had to. There's more to it, like most tales, said Marwyn, sucking loudly at his teeth. This hero had need of a hero's blade. For 30 days and 30 nights, he labored, and forged the first in the sacred fires only to have it burst asunder when he tempered it in the water. The second time, he labored longer. 50 days and 50 nights. He captured a lion, tempered its blade in its red heart, and it shattered and split once more. For the last and final attempt, he labored 100 days and 100 nights, and when his work was done, he summoned his wife, Nissa Nissa. She bared her breast, and he tempered the smoking sword through her living heart. And thus he forged Lightbringer, the red sword of heroes. That left her more confused than before. Find the lost blade, the one you forged as Azur Ahai did, that was what Quaithe had said. Dany had no blade, only, my dragons. Azur Ahai had killed his wife to bring forth Lightbringer, and Dany had, she had. I destroyed Dragonstone, the home my ancestors built. I abandoned my child, and my husband, and saw my brother die. And this Azur Ahai, he is the same as the one they call Prince that was promised. Marwyn took a stained handkerchief from his robes and loudly blew his nose. Each place has its own story, Princess. In some, he is Hikun the hero, others Yuntar, others yet Neferian or Eldrick Shadowchaser. But Azur Ahai, whether he was legend or man, is dead. The prince that was promised is yet to come, or maybe already has. Another puzzle. My brother Roriger thinks I am that man. What do you think, Maester? He half smiled, and his smile was more like a growl. Gorgan of Oldgis once wrote that a prophecy is like a treacherous woman. She takes your member in her mouth, and you moan with the pleasure of it and think, how sweet, how fine, how good this is, and then her teeth snap shut and your moans turn to screams. That is the nature of prophecy, said Gorgan. Prophecy will bite your prick off every time. Despite her heavy heart, Dany couldn't help but giggle at that. But still, the maester sighed. You brought the dragons to life and now all the world has seen them. There was no more talk of prophecy after that. They turned first to appointments that must be filled in place of the men who were with the king, and after that to the food stores. What of the Winterfell? Aegon asked, turning to her. Dany remembered Lady Catelyn's lessons. Lord Stark said the next winter would be a long one. When I left, there was food enough for 8 years perhaps. But they would have missed the last harvest when the men went to fight. It's growing colder, the farmers will have left their fields and gone to the winter town. It will be harder still for the other houses, with only the women and the old left behind. And the rest? The prince asked his council. The Riverlands are well supplied, as are the Vale, Dorne, and the Stormlands. The Westerlands and the Reach both had fields burned by the Ironborn, said Lord Went. He scratched at his white beard. And that is another matter. The Iron Islands have next to nothing. Lord Harlaw has written, the situation is dire. I say we let the traitors starve. Lord Valerian frowned, and let them raid the shores of Westeros once more when they are grow desperate. This was the way of these councils, Dany had learned. The lords would argue, and all the while they would watch Aegon, and guess what he might say. When at last he spoke, they seemed to measure every word. How the Prince of Dragonstone figured in their estimation, they were clever enough to hide. Aegon shifted in his seat. Lord Valerian is right. I will not have it said that House Targaryen left men to starve who might have been saved if we acted sooner. We will need to buy food from the east, my prince, Lord Connington said, evenly. Can the royal treasury bear it? Asked Aegon. Lord Went sniffed. The king inherited a treasury flowing with gold, and the gods have blessed his reign. It can bear it. Connington picked up a quill, as Aegon turned to her again. Dany, what say you? Kings are meant to do justice, she said. What else were they for, if not that? Rhaegar had punished the Greyjoys, but even on the Iron Islands there were innocents, surely, who had not fought, or marched only at command. There is nothing just in withholding food from a starving people. Sir Barristan said nothing, but seemed to Dany to smile when she said that, a fleeting gesture that disappeared in a blink. Their discussions dragged well into the afternoon before refreshments were brought in, fruit and cheese and fry bread, with a jug of honeyed wine to wash it down. When the plates were cleared, Prince Luwin Martell came. The knight had not been with them on Pike, and it had been many years since Dany laid eyes on the Queen's uncle. He was old, though not as old as Sir Barristan, tall and slim with a widow's peak of hair as white as snow and a beard just as white. He had been at the wall with Rhaegar, Dany knew, and the look of weariness upon him filled her with disquiet, as did the sight of his travelling clothes. He had not taken time to rest, nor wash. If Aegon felt similarly, he hid it. He smiled brightly when his great-uncle entered, and rose to embrace him. What news of the wall, uncle? He asked, when all were seated. Prince Luwin sighed. All of it is ill, and dark enough to cast the light out of any room. They need food, and plenty of it. Before the war, there was enough to last the watch 3 years of winter, perhaps 4. But now, they are feeding the Northerners, the king's men, and wildlings. If it continues, the food will be gone before the year is out. The king sends me to command a first shipment, and secure a second. A memory prodded at Dany. The Lord Commander was Jon now. She did not know if his new command boded well or ill. Wildlings? Lord Went asked, frowning. Why precisely are we feeding wildlings? Because it is the king's command, my lord, Prince Luwin replied, dryly. Aegon leaned forward in his seat. There was a map of Westeros before him. Beyond the wall were only a few markings, but most a great white wilderness. It seemed to Dany his eyes rested on that spot. How does Rhaegar fare, sir? Asked Lord Connington. Healthy in mind and spirit, but he is troubled. All are. More and more wildlings arrive each day, fleeing the danger that grows beyond the wall. The Northerners have built pyres where the bodies of the dead are buried, so they do not rise up as whites. A grim silence settled over the door. How many of the men believed it? Dany wondered. What do they look like? She asked at last. Have you seen these things, sir? In her dreams, they were a great host, armored in ice. No, your grace, I have not had the honor, Prince Luwin said. But those who have were brought before the king. A black brother says he killed one with a dragon glass knife. Dragonstone had been mined for it since she was a girl. There is some hope then. But the wall still stands and the king is safe, and we have time enough to talk of terror. I would speak with the Prince of Dragonstone first. A look passed between Prince and great-uncle, and the room was dismissed, free to leave the chambers and enter into the light of the afternoon as it slanted down the thick windows of the Red Keep to dapple the red stone with diamonds of 100 colors. A dance master had come from Lies to teach the ladies of the court a new dance in the Queen's ballroom. Elsewhere, a company of youth would soon start a hunt for a red fox that had been sighted in the Kingswood, and lunch would be served in one of the many gardens. Dany found she had no taste for amusement now. She returned to her room, and her handmaiden Lara, and the mountain of sewing which lay before them. At last, Dany coaxed some words out of the Dornish girl, some stories of the western desert where her family came from, which she shared through pretty blushes and shy giggles. There were clothes to be made for dragon riding, trousers and tunics of rough linen, and hats to shield her from the sun when she flew. In children's tales, all the dragon riders wore silks, high boots, and satin cloaks, but Dany had quickly learned none of that would do. Even her cloak was a simple wool, embroidered only with a single dragon within the lining to make her feel braver. It was only when it grew too dark to sew that her nephew came to see her. Lara was dismissed, and in her place sat Aegon. Her nephew was dressed in ringmail, a sword hanging at his waist, uncrowned. Dany felt a prickle of unease. Is aught amiss? His long hair fell like a curtain between them as he leaned over the table. With a slender hand, he pushed it behind his ear and turned to face her. Her nephew looked somber in a way she had seldom seen him. The Tyrells are gone. I quarrelled with Loras Tyrell, and he has taken his father's lords with him back to the Reach. Aegon bit his lip, then seemed to catch him and stopped. I will not be marrying Margaery. It is done. It took Dany a moment to comprehend his words. Why? The Prince of Dragonstone left his seat and came before her now. With a tenderness that surprised her, he took her right hand in his and pressed his lips against her skin. For you? No. Dany pulled away. Something unspeakable was occurring to her. What are you saying? With that kiss, I pledge myself to you. It is a kiss of a life to come. Marry me, and everything will be as it should have been. Marry. This is not fitting. Take it back. Say it is a joke. I cannot. I will not. You will, Dany said. She left her seat then, and moved away from him. I cannot wed you. I can't. You will, Aegon said, placidly. Dany's anger flared within her. I will not, she repeated. I have given you my trust and my obedience. And a dragon. But even you cannot have it all. I will not give you my hand. You must, he insisted. Everything is in place. The Tyrells have gone, my uncle in Dorne is fortifying the passes, and we shall bring the dragons back and speak to the High Septon. Her fury gave her a strength, and with it she wanted to grab her nephew, to cling to him as though he, who inflicted the wound, could ease her suffering. And my husband? Have you forgotten about him? Aegon shrugged. What of him? You will keep him, it would make things easier. Easier? You say it will be easier, he had betrayed her. He promised her she could trust him, and with a kiss he broke it. Have you always been so cold? Her nephew reached for her, but she shrugged him off. Cold? Aegon shook his head and seemed almost hurt. Is that how you see me? Some cold-hearted betrayer? The dragon must have 3 heads. She had thought it meant something beyond a sigil. 3 dragons, 3 riders, bound by blood and something more. Trust. But her nephew was a liar, and a well-hidden one. Dany wanted to wound him as he had wounded her, but the next stroke was his. It is my father's command. She had lost Viserys, and her father and mother before him. Aegon sought to use her, and Rhaegar. No. You lie. She was sure of it. What king would wish to tear apart his own kingdom? No, I'm telling you the truth. Daenerys, forgive me, He looked pained, almost as much as she did. But no, that was a lie too. Beware, Quaithe had warned her. And what had she done instead? Closed her eyes to the truth before her, like a child. She had thought that part of her had burned away with the rest of her on Dragonstone. I won't forgive you, she said. I can't. Suddenly, Dany could not look upon that face she found so fair. She turned her back on him, her skirts swirling. What will you do, Daenerys? He chased after her and held her arm as she neared the door. She pulled away roughly. Do not touch me. Forgive me. He repeated. His hand dropped to his side. Please, listen. You would make me your whore. No, I would make you my wife, and my queen, Aegon said, calmly. You look at me as though I were a monster. But I am not that. I do this for the realm. Dany had felt his eyes on her and let what she found there go unsaid. She had wanted to believe she could trust him. She longed to, and that longing had doomed her. You do this for yourself. Would you have me say I do not desire you? Will that make it easier to bear? I want you, I do. And I will make you a good husband. You may scoff at that, but it's true. I bring you the crown of Westeros as a wedding gift. Here, you only have to open your hand and take it. No man had ever spoken to her thus. Daenerys felt ill. Please, Dany. Don't look at me like that. He lifted his hand up to touch her again, and let it fall upon remembering. Do I disgust you that much? Has your love for Robb Stark grown so deep? Tell me you have never dreamed of another life, another man. Tell me and I will know in your eyes if it's true. She had, in those lonely days and nights in Winterfell. Only, it was not some robber knight or princeling come to steal her but Robb, kinda. In those dreams, he brought her flowers from the glass gardens and left ribbons hidden in her room. Love though. Dany did not love her husband, because he had not loved her. More words, more secrets and sweet gestures had passed between her and Aegon in the past months as they walked together, flew together, than in her marriage. She loved her nephew, not in the way a woman loves a man perhaps, but it was love all the same. But that was all a mummer show. At least Robb did not pretend. You wish to trap me, Dany said instead. You have set the pieces before speaking to me. You broke your contract with the Tyrells, you would have the Prince of Dawn prepare for war, and now you turn to me and say you want me, knowing if I refuse you are doomed. You seek to deceive me even now. No, I never deceived you. You lied to me, she repeated. How many times had she said it? 100 was not enough. You planned for this, and all that time, each moment was a betrayal. And now you prepare our graves before us with each word. Dany thought of Ned Stark's stern face and the great sword they called ice. Perhaps, Aegon admitted. Perhaps not. Winter is coming, as they say, and the North will need us as they never did before. If you set Robb Stark aside, certainly the banners will be called, but I don't ask for that. He will be your first husband, and I your second. There is precedence. Daenerys knew her history too. Do you mean Aegon the Conqueror, or Maegor the Cruel? Aegon, he said, firmly. For that is who you are. You fly upon Balerion the Black Dread, and your fate is to save Westeros, as was his. Why, then, can you not take 2 men for husbands, as he did Visenya and Rhaenys? Is it because you are a woman? You, most of all, should know better than that. If it was meant as flattery, it was a poor attempt. I know what I am better than you do. Robb will not bear it. A wild anger was filling her. My son is at Winterfell. Do you understand that, what that might mean? Even as she said, she herself was unsure. Her mind reeled. Robb would not harm their son, but in his anger, would he rob him of his birthright? Bran Stark was lost when last she heard, but could Ned Stark proclaim Rickon would be the one to follow Robb? What would become of her son then? He would be no more than a hostage. Aegon was not as clever as he thought. If he was, he would have brought Cregan to her first. I do, he admitted. And we hold Lyanna Stark. She is in the home my father made for her in the Kingswood, little more than a stone's throw away. The thought of that filled her with terror. A hostage for a hostage, and in the end it would be blood for blood. Listen to me. Do this, and Ned Stark will call his banners, and with him Arryn, Tully and Baratheon. And if I do not do this. He did not shout, but his face was growing red. It only made him look more beautiful, and that made her angrier. You worry for Cregan. As do I, and for my children too. What would happen should you return to Winterfell when the war is done, and Shadowtamer with you? Dragons live longer than men. When you die, who will claim him? Your son will, or some other child you give Robb Stark. What then? Do you think that Ryder will be content to sit in the north? Or would his eyes turn south? What could compel him to accept the rule of the Iron Throne, when he commands a dragon? The Starks made an oath. They bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror. And when Eddard Stark took up arms against your father, that vow was broken. Something prodded at her. Was Riverrun only a farce? You offered Rhaenys a dragon and she refused it. If she agreed, her dragon would go to a Tully, as you fear mine will go to a Stark. Would you wed her too? I didn't know yet what I would do. It sounded like an admission, but she could trust nothing he said. I would have given Rhaenys a dragon, it was no farce. I am not as adept a liar as you seem to think. But Edmure Tully is not Robb Stark, and you are not my sister. Whoever rides Brighton, when we wed we will have 2 dragons against 1. He sighed and touched the scar above his lip. You are all that matters. To the dragons, to Westeros, to me. Aegon knelt before her, and touched the hem of her dress. No one else has brought me to my knees but you. Daenerys. Dany. I beg you. Daenerys turned away. She was sure the door would be bolted and barred from the other side, but it yielded before her. Guardsmen lined the hallway, but they stared at the red stone before them. These men would be no help to her. I have no friends here, Dany thought, this is his realm, his kingdom, and I will be trapped in his maze. The girl within her wanted to run, to race down the stairs until the sky was above her head, but she was no child. My mother was a queen, she reminded herself, and I am the blood of the dragon. The dragon does not fear, the dragon does not flee. It did not make her heart beat any slower, but she walked with as much dignity as she could muster. She had only to make it across the hall, and down the endless stairs, and when she had left the holdfast, Daenerys Aegon called out from behind her. He is dignified too, she thought bitterly. He did not shout or plead now, but spoke gently, not as a beggar but as a king. Don't leave. Is that your command? She asked, bitingly as the guards stared on, unlooking, still as gargoyles. No, I would never hold you against your will. You're free to go, if you wish. But think for a moment. Where will you go? You would take Shadowtamer and fly where? To Winterfell. And then what? Will you raise an army to fight me? Shall we have another dance? Would your heart bear that? I am nothing to you now, perhaps, but I am your blood still, and one day you will call me king, he said, calmly. That, she would never do. I couldn't harm you. I am not a kinslayer. But I am. Aegon was looking at her now, and perhaps thinking it too. Her father's body on the pike flashed before her. We are both of us kinslayers. And Viserys. Was her blood not on her hands too? She had to leave. Winterfell, Daenerys longed to say, for no one's sake but that of her son. It was too tempting a thought, too sweet and treacherous too. Winterfell meant war. It might mean treason. The wall flashed in her mind, all the more dangerous. There was Rhaegar, and Robb and Ned Stark. There, everything would spill out, and she did not know how hot the Starks' anger would run nor how quickly swords might be drawn. I am friendless and alone, she thought. She could return to Riverrun, but what welcome would Rhaenys give her, once she learned of her brother's plans? The world suddenly felt small around her. Neither would I, said her nephew. Daenerys, come with me. Please. There is something I would show you. When she did not move, he stretched his hand out. Please. It is not a cell in a dungeon. He mustered a weak smile. Gods help her, she did not know what path to take. If she left now, walked out of the Red Keep, she knew he might call her enemy. She wished only, wanted only a family, a small and quiet life. For her mother and Viserys to be alive, for her son to grow older, for what was the use? She would leave, she wanted to, but the idea of it made her feel so fragile as to crumble any moment. Another dance, Aegon had said, and for what? She did not wish to sit on the Iron Throne. There would not be any kingdom for either of them to rule over, only a realm of the dead. That is how he seeks to trap me. Their aims were the same. He spoke of peace and war as though to against him was to allow the triumph of their enemies. Dany followed him, and swore it was for the last time. Wordlessly, they climbed to the highest tower of Maegor's Holdfast. The room he took her to was far grander than her own, with a massive hearth and a great canopied bed. A tall wardrobe decorated with dragon carvings seemed full enough to burst, and upon the feather bed lay yards of red silk, embroidered with the smallest of rubies, and her crown of the three-headed dragon. A room fit for a queen, Dany thought. My room if I were to be his queen. It's for your wedding gown. You may touch it, if you wish, said Aegon, with a veiled eagerness. I will not, Dany replied stubbornly. If she touched it, she felt as though she would burn. Is this what you have brought me here to see, some silk and a piece of gold you have already given me? For some reason that seemed to amuse him. He smiled, and shook his head. Come, look out the window with me. They were all open. The air felt fresher here, cooler. From here she could see the heavy iron portcullis in the gatehouse were up and the drawbridge down over the deep dry moat that separated the keep within a keep from the larger castle that surrounded it. Dany thought she could see a bit of the sea. That helped to calm her. What did Viserys tell you of your father? Aegon asked. Her patience wore thin. Little. He must have thought ignorance might protect you. As for me, I would rather choose to see than remain blind. Are you like me? When she did not answer, he sighed, and looked out at the world beyond. After my grandfather was freed from Duskendale, his mind began to turn to dragons. He believed they above all would protect him from his enemies. And so, he had stone dragon eggs brought from Dragonstone, and turned to the Guild of Alchemists to make use of their wildfire. This was a tale she had not heard, but she did not show it. Their efforts came to naught, clearly, but by then the madness for fire had taken him. When the Oathbreaker Robert Baratheon began his war, Aerys' fear grew and he commanded the alchemists to store caches of wildfire all over King's Landing. Only Lord Chelstead spoke out, his new hand, and the king had him burnt alive. Daenerys had gone cold all over. Another lie, she wanted to believe, but her heart did not let her. Who told you that tale? Jaime Lannister saw it, and did nothing. He told my father, and my father told me. The wildfire was everywhere, beneath Baelor's September, at all 7 gates, in some places in the Red Keep. He spread it through the city. It was to be his gift to Robert Baratheon, a city of ashes. My father had the alchemists remove as much as they could find, but only the gods know how much remains hidden away. My father was a butcher. She had known it, a vague shadow that followed her throughout her life. He must have been, to have killed Brandon Stark and his companions, though the man had called for Rhaegar's death. But what had Rickard Stark done? He had burned this man Chelstead too, and how many others? And if Aegon could be believed, he would have burned all of King's Landing. Why are you telling me this? Dany asked, do you mean to say I am my father's daughter? No. No. You're not that, he said softly. You might think me a fool, but I am not so much that to think I can hold you by force, even if I wished to. I tell you so that you might, be cautious. He is frightened, but hides it better than me. He fears for his kingdom above anything. And if I should go, you will go knowing it means the death of our house. Dany could bear no more. Leave me. Get out of my sight. Forever, she wished to say, but even now she could not. He betrayed me. He had saved her upon Pike, risked his life to kill Euron Greyjoy, he had flown with her, he had made her smile. But he lied. Aegon hesitated for half a moment, and then bowed his head. My rooms are across the hall, should you have need of me. When the door was shut behind her nephew, Dany remained by the window. Something there had caught her eye, dancing upon the wind. Ashes, she thought with horror. But no, no. She put her hand outside. It was snow. The sight of it, floating, the feel of it, cold in her hands as pinpricks, filled her with grief. Egon dreamed a future that had begun to fade within her. A life after the war, a victory against the dead, when she would live long enough to bear more children. Her story would not have such an ending, she had begun to see. It ended there, in the cold. How many would die, for her nephew's dream? When at last they fought his wars and turned to the north, would the wall still be standing? Before that day came, everything would be stripped of her, she thought bitterly. Her son she had lost, her husband, her brother, and now Egon. Was she fated to die unloved, betrayed? But I have my dragons. They were hers, no matter who rode them. They were a wonder, and a terror, and beyond price. Perhaps they would survive, perhaps they would live on after she met her death. Would some piece of her live on in them, some memory? She wanted to believe it. With each moment, she decided. She would stay. No, she would go. But where? All roads were closed to her. Winterfell, the north. Would her nephew take it as a call for war? Would Robb? Shadowtamer was strong, but even he would have to rest. Where would they find shelter? In the wilderness, she was likely to freeze, and in any castle south of the Neck, Egon would find her. And what would happen once he did? He told her he cared for her, but it was he who mentioned the dance. Besides, there may be no shelter to be found in the north either. The northerners had no great love for her, and she would bring another war to them. But if she did not leave, but wed her nephew, war would find her anyway. I was a fool to trust him. Viserys had always said what a dolt she was. Perhaps he was right. This trap was Egon's making, and the deadly paths set forth before her were by his hand. Dany fell asleep there, in a chair by the snow, and when she did, she dreamt of her brother. They were children once more, standing together in Egon's garden. "It's your fault," Viserys' brother said, crossly. "You were born too late. If you had born more timely, Rhaegar would have married you instead of Elia, and everything would have come out different." Dany opened her mouth to protest, but he faded before her, and in his place was a pile of ashes. Ashes, ashes. They were everywhere. They were on her tongue, in her hair, on the ground like a soft carpet beneath her. All the world was grey and dead, save for the Iron Throne and the man who sat upon it, bleeding from 1,000 scabs opened anew. "Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat," he said, "let him be the king of ashes." In her dream, she ran and the wasteland faded away from her. A man and woman stood before her now, naked, tenderly caressing each other, bodies on a bed made of fire. That is me, she realized, not as she was now, perhaps not as she ever had been, but long-haired and beautiful with the full rounded belly of pregnancy. The man clinging to her was Egon. He whispered something unheard into her ear, and then his lips were at her nipple, and his hands between her thighs, and she kissed his neck, and wrapped his hair in her hands like a robe. Dany watched as their caresses turned into scratches, their moans into growls, and when he entered her they began to eat away at each other. That which they did not swallow they flung into the fire as the flames danced around them. It was beautiful, and horrible. The fire consumed them. When they were gone, no more than hunks of uneaten meal, rotting already in the dark, something else stood in their midst. Molten eyes beheld her. "Shadowtamer," Dany called out to her dragon, and it was him, but also not. He shifted before her as a candle flickered, and it was her silver dragon who stood staring. And then they too were gone, and Dany looked at herself as she had been, a child frightened as a doe. When she opened her mouth to speak, fire poured out. She woke, gasping, and knew what she would do. Dany could bring a dragon to heel with a whip and a word. Was not her nephew too a dragon? Outside, the snow had mixed with rain. It was dawn, or just about, but the sun would not shine today. It mattered little. He will come, he will come. Dany washed her face in the freezing water of the basin and tied her short hair back as best she could before stepping into the hall. The crown she left behind. The guards were there, as before, faces hidden in their helms. "Tell the prince I have gone to Dragonstone to think on his words," she said, loudly. They did not move. One final time, Dany climbed, up a final level and to the heavy wooden doors that led to the roof. Armed guards stood here too, their faces hidden under the helm. Egon had told her she may go where she wished. It was time she tested that. Open it, she commanded. They obeyed, and Dany was hit with a burst of cold air. She ignored the guards standing at the battlement, cloaks pulled tightly around them, their crossbows in hand, looking out of the crenellations, and stood at the center of the storm. He will come, he will. She had called to him in her dream, and he had answered. Dany did not know how long she stood until the familiar shadow began to move against the dark clouds, like a moth flitting in and out of the moonlight. She felt him, as surely as she felt the scratch of her clothes on her skin, or the sleet settling in her hair. The guards shouted out only when he had come close, his leathery wings above them, his eyes glowing like hellfire and pale fires between his jaws. Dany silenced them with a command. She mounted Shadow Tamer easily, as familiar as riding a horse now, drawing out the whip she kept chained to his saddle, and then they were in the air. She had never flown him in the rain. Her dragons hated it, and now Dany could understand why. All the world around her was a wet, cold darkness, where she could tell neither ground from sky. Her dragon had come to heed her commands, though not as obediently as she would have hoped. He struggled against her some days, set his will against hers, headstrong to the end. Tonight, though, he would listen. They flew east, aiming for the sea. To go forward you must go backwards. Where else was there to go, than where it had all begun? When last she had been on Dragonstone, they had remained far from the burning wreckage of the keep. But the fire was out, and that was where Shadow Tamer had taken her now. It was dark, too dark to see much, only the glimmer of the stars to guide her. But there was the bridge that had led from the stone drum to the dungeons. There was the great hall that had once been fashioned as a huge dragon lying on its belly. Its back was full of large, gaping holes. There was Aegon's garden, dead and ruined, and there, everywhere, were small stone dragons, basilisks, cockatrices, demons, hellhounds and manticores, statues missing heads or wings or feet. They seemed to smile at her. "Don't leave me," Daenerys told her dragon. She began to weave through the wreckage. She climbed over remnants of black stones and jagged rubble, for what seemed like hours until the rough pain of blisters began to grow in the soles of her feet. At last, when the rain began to beat down harder on her head, she went inside what was left of the great hall. The benches were burned, the tapestries ash, and great rocks the size of her dragon's wing blocked her path, but in some spaces she found cover beneath the half-fallen roof. The birds of the isle seemed to have a similar idea. A group of crows had settled on what looked like a piece of the great stone dragon's ear, now covered in moss. They were no more than 30, pecking away at the green beneath them. Dany stared out at the darkness beyond. The rain was falling harder than ever, drumming against the ground. She watched as rivers of water ran over the stones, washing them clean. When she turned back, the birds were looking at her, each and every one, 60 identical eyes shining black in the darkness. "There's enough room for all of us until the storm passes," Daenerys said, frowning. "Storm?" one of the crows cried. "Yes, storm," she repeated, uneasily. "You're a clever bird." "Storm," another said, and another, until they were all hopping and screeching the word. "Storm, storm, storm." They hurled out the word, and each time the echo sounded, they sent another into the darkness. "Quiet, or you'll wake my dragon." "Dragon," they repeated, on and on, some hopping in places, other only staring at her, until she had enough. Dany left her shelter, and went to find him. Thunder cracked like a whip over her head, pushing her forward. At times it felt to her as though she were being followed, but when she turned there was nothing there. And then she was up, following the trail of sheep and goat bones that led up to an endless climb of slippery black stones, and she did not dare to turn around. One misstep and she would fall, not to her death perhaps but to injury. She would lie upon the wreckage, bones broken, waiting for aid that would not come. And so Dany looked up at the black sky and the top of the hill and the rain that fell into her eyes and threatened to blind her. After an hour or more she arrived at the lair her dragon had made, a makeshift cave burrowed into the side of the mountain that Dragonstone's outer walls once hugged. The air smelled of ash, a sharper scent than the scent of brimstone on the isle. The ground beneath her was strewn with burned and broken bones, and within, her silver dragon hid from the rain, smoke rising from his nostrils. "Why have you been gone so long?" Dany asked. He made no reply. Carefully, she moved towards him. They still frightened her, her children. At times it felt as though they recognized her, watched her with something she might call affection. Other times, she saw nothing when she looked upon their eyes, only an endless pit of apathy. His gaze lingered on her. A riderless dragon was not unlike a wild animal, Roriger had told her, when last they were on Dragonstone, and he taught her what he knew of dragon lore. During the storming of the dragon pit, they had burned small folk in their panic. Vermithor had loosed his wrath on all at Tumbleton, recognizing neither friend nor foe. Worse than an untrained hound, Roriger had said, and infinitely more dangerous. Find your lost blade, Quaithe had said. Was Brightson what she meant? Well, I have found him, Dany thought, and what shall I do with him? He would not move so long as it rained, she knew. Dany kicked at the bones on the ground to clear herself a space, and sat. Together, they waited for the skies to clear and watched as the sun rose, gold and pink, and shimmered off the wind-whipped surface of the sea. Her nephew would be here soon. He was cautious atop Dragonback, unlikely to fly when it rained. Come on then, Dany said, rising on sore legs. She gripped the whip. Let's leave this place. When she stepped out, her dragon did not follow. Come on, she called again, and suddenly he was upon her, crawling out of his lair with an astonishing speed before taking to the skies. Lucky dragon, Dany thought. The descent awaited her, a scramble down the stones that was harder even than the climb. At least the rain had stopped, she told herself miserably, as she battled against scrapes and bruises, clumsy moves all. The birds were here too, watching her with something that might have been amusement. They were scattered, here and there, like an honor guard, escorting her down. At last, on the ground, she went back to what had been Dragonstone's gates to find Shadow Tamer lazily curled up upon himself. Dany wondered if he knew what she planned to do, as he had known she needed him on King's Landing. Further down the ruins was Brightson, perched on the rocks, head moving as though he were searching for the scent of something. 2 dragons against 1, Egon had said. She would not fight him. Never, never. He was her blood, her brother's son. Whatever wound she gave him would be as a deeper cut to her own skin. But 1 dragon had not been enough to make him listen. And, if he persisted, stubborn as he was, perhaps she could go to the wall alone. Perhaps 2 dragons were enough against whatever awaited them. Egon would not be so cowardly, could he? No, Dany thought, it could not all have been a lie. It was he who had found her the first time, when she landed upon Dragonstone atop Shadow Tamer. What would he find this time? Her ashes, her bones. 2 dead dragons, and her corpse between them. She wondered if he would mourn her, or only her dragons. Am I brave or mad? Perhaps she was her father's daughter after all, despite her nephew's protestations. Perhaps Viserys had asked himself that as he approached her dragon and tried to claim it, before he was burned. With bleeding palms, she squeezed her whip once more. Brightson, Dany called loudly, moving closer. His head turned at the mention of his name. I gave you your life, I named you. And now you must obey. She let her whip loose into the silver dragon's side. It would have been nothing more than as a flea's bite to him, but he screamed. Listen to me, Dany shouted. Beneath her the stones were slippery. She must not fall. If she fell, she would die. The time for play is over. Come now. You must learn to obey. She cracked her whip a second time, and Brightson flew away, no more than 50 feet eastwards towards the sea. Dany followed, though in her heart she knew she did not want to die. Did that make her a coward? Turning one last time to be sure Shadow Tamer was behind her, Dany whipped her silver dragon one last time. This time, he let out a roar, and with it a stream of fire, a furnace wind above her head that she flung herself to the ground to dodge. And in that red hell, like some worm, she crawled on her belly to Shadow Tamer and grabbed a hold of her saddle just as he turned, to snap at his brother. Brightson lashed his tail sideways in anger, catching rocks and gargoyles behind him, breaking them as easily as glass. That too seemed to anger Shadow Tamer, and at her command, the black dragon was upon him. Dany remembered that terrible battle upon Pike, when Brightson and Sea Flame had been as though possessed by the madness of the Horn. It had been a battle to the death. But it would not be this time. She held on to her saddle and her whip, and commanded Shadow Tamer onwards until the 2 beasts were locked together, their roars echoing off the cliffs of the Dragonmont. The smaller dragon sought to take the fight to the air. But Dani could not allow that. It was a danger too great, a battlefield too large. Brightson pulled his wing out of Shadowtamer's jaw and tried to fly, but the black dragon was upon him at every turn, driving him down into the mud and hard rock. They came together and pulled apart, a deadly dance, twisting out of each other's grip, tearing at each other's flesh, and each time the bloodlust was upon Shadowtamer, Dani pulled him back. It was not death or maiming she wanted, but submission. It was a moment, and a lifetime. I am dying, she thought 1,000 times, as the flames of fire licked at her skin or she slid almost from her saddle, and it tasted neither bitter nor sweet. When she was covered in dragon blood and ash, Brightson was at last trapped beneath Shadowtamer's claws, the black dragon's teeth at its neck. He snapped his tail and beat his wings at the air, but he could not break free. I am a betrayer too, Dani thought, when at last she slid from her saddle. Bare your breast, and know that I love you best of all that is in this world, Quaithe had said. But it was her own breast she had bared, and her own heart she had killed. She cracked her whip once more, and this time Brightson's roar was full of pain. Dani had never felt so scared. She hit him again, and leapt on his silver scales, climbing half blind in fear, like a flea burrows on the skin of a dog. As he twisted beneath her, Dani dug her hands into his scales, so sharply she felt some of her nails break off, and with the last of her strength called for Shadowtamer to let his brother loose from his grip. Brightson beat his bleeding wings twice, and was in the air, fighting to fly and fighting to be free of her, twisting his neck back to snap. Stop, Dani screamed, cracking her whip again and again until she thought her arm might fall off. And then the dragon was still. A peace came over him, and they flew together as one, circling Dragonstone as she had with Shadowtamer, flying between dark clouds where the sky was still wet, and through the first rays of sun lighting their way. Twice they went around the isle before Brightson dove to the ground, shrugging her off when he landed. Dani tumbled among the rocks, her head hitting the ground hard. When she opened her eyes, Brightson leaned over her, pale fires burning behind the shining daggers of his teeth, so close she could feel the heat of them. Dani dared to look. There, in his eyes was anger. There, was pain. There, they were no longer bronze, but red. Red as fresh blood, red as rubies, red as weirwood sap. Notes. Thank you so much for your overwhelming, kind response to the previous chapter. As some of you who have been following this story for a while might know, I went through a personal loss which led me to taking a long break from writing. It's been very restorative and reassuring to get back into writing and creative pursuits. A major part of that is because of you all, who have taken the time to read and interact with my writing. Thank you all, sincerely. I think this was the trickiest for me to write after the chapter where the dragons are born, and I'm feeling quite nervous about posting it, probably more than any other chapter. I spent a long time writing and rewriting with the question in mind of what dragons make possible and how Dani might use them, all the while there is a convergence of so much magic in a moment of true desperation. My original plan was to be at the wall next, but I know this chapter opens up more questions than it answers, so maybe we'll stick with Dani and Egon for a bit, as this is really a prelude to everything that will unfold between them. Thank you again, truly, and I hope you enjoy. Chapter 25, John 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The white wolf raced through a black wood, beneath a pale cliff as tall as the sky. The moon ran with him, slipping through a tangle of bare branches overhead, across the starry sky. Snow crunched beneath his paws. The wind sighed through the trees. Far off, he could hear his packmates calling to him, like to like. They were hunting too. The white wolf padded along the man trail beneath the icy cliff. The taste of blood was on his tongue, and his ears rang to the song of the 100 cousins. He raced toward the cave of night where the sun had hidden, his breath frosting in the air. On starless nights the great cliff was as black as stone, a darkness towering high above the wide world, but when the moon came out it shimmered pale and icy as a frozen stream. The wolf's pelt was thick and shaggy, but when the wind blew along the ice no fur could keep the chill out. On the other side the wind was colder still, the wolf sensed. That was where his brother was, the grey brother who smelled of summer. An icicle tumbled from a branch. The white wolf turned and bared his teeth. His fur rose bristling, as the woods dissolved around him. And then he heard the beat of wings. Through the gloom a raven flew. It landed on Jon Snow's chest with a thump and a scrabbling of claws and screamed into his face. "Is this how you woke Mormont? Get your feathers out of my face." Jon wriggled an arm out from under his blankets to shoo the raven off. It was a big bird, old and bold and scruffy, utterly without fear. He filled his fist with a pillow and let fly, but the bird took to the air. The pillow struck the wall and burst, scattering stuffing everywhere. His wolf dreams had been growing stronger, and each morning when he awoke the smell of the hunt was upon him. In his dreams, his packmates called to him, like to like, as they hunted too. Grey Wind was closest, but some nights he even heard Arya's wolf, far away, somewhere warmer, howling at the moon and moving closer. And the one which had been Bran's, which he had called Summer. As much as it pained him to admit, Jon knew no boy would survive in the wilderness for so long. And yet, at Queenscrown, Summer had come out of the darkness to save his life. He wondered if some part of his dead cousin lived inside his wolf. 100 times he thought to speak to Robb, and see if he had such dreams too. But each time, something stopped him. A cold, hard anger had been upon Robb as of late. One night, he'd exchanged sharp words with Harry on Karstark over Bran in the common hall, and in his fury Grey Wind had jumped on the table and bared his teeth. 100 men seemed to spring to their feet then, but Robb calmed himself long enough to call his wolf back with a word. Lord Stark had been wroth, though his anger burned colder than Robb's, and Karstarks and Starks spent the evening in talks together behind closed doors. What passed between them, Jon did not ask. He was not Lord Stark's nephew now, he was the Lord Commander and his troubles were many. The room was dim, his palate hard. Grey light leaked through the shutters, promising another bleak cold day. Jon was tired. "I need more sleep." He had been up half the night poring over maps, writing letters, and making plans with Maester Aemon. Even after stumbling into his narrow bed, rest had not come easily. He knew what he would face each day, and had found himself tossing restlessly as he brooded on Maester Aemon's words. "Allow me to give my lord one last piece of counsel," the old man had said, "the same counsel that I once gave my brother when we parted for the last time." He was 33 when the great council chose him to mount the Iron Throne. A man grown with sons of his own, yet in some ways still a boy. Egg had an innocence to him, a sweetness we all loved. "Kill the boy within you," I told him the day I took ship for the wall. "It takes a man to rule. An Aegon, not an egg. Kill the boy and let the man be born." The old man felt Jon's face. "You are half the age that Egg was, and your own burden is a crueler one, I fear. You will have little joy of your command, but I think you have the strength in you to do the things that must be done. Kill the boy, Jon. Winter is almost upon us. Kill the boy and let the man be born." My great-great-uncle, Jon had thought, my great-great-grandfather. But that mattered little now, if it ever did. It was only the stain of being the king's bastard that followed him still, a proclamation as stark as his rise to Lord Commander. Among the lords Rhaegar had brought with him were Dornishmen who watched him with hard eyes and kept well away from the Northerners. More would be arriving soon, and with them soldiers from all the 7 kingdoms, if the king had his way. And I have to figure out where to put them. Jon rose, and filled his basin from the flagon of water beside his bed, washed his face and hands, donned a clean set of black woolens, laced up a black leather jerkin and pulled on a pair of well-worn boots. Ghost sat on the floor, gnawing at the bone of an ox. Mormont's raven watched with shrewd black eyes, then fluttered to the window. "Do you take me for your thrall?" When Jon folded back the window with its thick diamond-shaped panes of yellow glass, the chill of the morning hit him in the face. He took a breath to clear away the cobwebs of the night as the raven flapped away. "That bird is too clever by half." It had been the old bear's companion for long years, but that had not stopped it from eating Mormont's face once he died. Outside his bedchamber 100 matters awaited him, each fouler than the last. Beyond the wall, 1,000 wildlings were penned up, the captives Lord Eddard and King Rhaegar had taken when their soldiers had smashed Mance Rayder's patchwork host. Many of the prisoners were women, and some of the guards had been sneaking them out to warm their beds. A few Black Brothers had tried the same thing. Men were men, and these were the only women for 1,000 leagues. Outside his bedchamber was his father, locked away in the king's tower alone, or surrounded by only those he trusted, Sir Arthur Dayne more often than not, but Sir Miles Mouton and Richard Lunmouth were often seen going in. And in the Tower of the Guards were Lord Stark and Rob, rarely invited into the King's Council. Today, their rooms were empty. His uncle and cousin were away, scouting beyond the wall. John had been loath to see them go and had entreated them to stay, but Lord Eddard said he could not keep his men waiting, lingering at the wall when they had keeps and lands to tend to before winter, knowing not when the wildlings would strike. One of his best of his rangers travelled with Rob and the northern lordlings who followed him, Dewin who knew the woods, the trees and streams, the plants that could be eaten and the ways of predator and prey better than any man. The second company was led by Lord Stark. With him went Ketch Whitey, the Great Jon, and others, all men of the north. Black Jack Bulwer led the third. Each party